Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. How good it is to be in a cozy wooden house with a burning fireplace in the freezing winter. When the light in the room is extinguished, the fire, impatiently bouncing on the birch logs, seems like a lighthouse fire, pointing the way to the ships of the stormy sea. When you put a few new fields under it, the stove begins to hum quite a bit, and through the closed furnace door you can hear the crackle of its unburned wood. I looked at the thermometer cheerfully opposite the wooden ones. The temperature in the chamber was steadily rising. The red column had already reached the 15 mark, but it wasn't going to stop, and this despite the fact that it was -34 outside. I built this hut 5 years ago. I chose the most remote corner of Belgorodskaya Pusha. I worked all summer alone and finally built what I had dreamed of for a long time. Some women, including my wife, can't understand why I have to go to such a remote place and sit here alone. But that's what it's all about, being alone and away from people. I first offered Adriana to visit my forest hotel, but she flatly refused. The mosquitoes, the cold, the loneliness. Even with me, she preferred the socializing, the girlfriends, the blah, 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 blahs, and the advertising-filled nightlife of the city. I didn't try to change that and philosophically accepted the solitude. My outdoor life is not for my wife. And that was the end of it. The hut stood on the bank of a small river. It was a kind of promontory, which is washed by dark waters on 3 sides. Despite the fact that there were 3 and a bunch of frosts, the river did not freeze completely. And even now, in the midst of winter, before me came the sound of a chortle. George's more often on the stones of water. I twisted the wick of the kerosene lamp, and the house became brighter. I relaxed, catching with all my body the heat developing in the room, leaned against the wall, on which hung a blue pelt. No matter how hard Nikon tries to moss the cracks between the ravings, the house still blows through. So I had to hang a rug on the wall, or like me, a skin, right in the center of this improvised carpet on carefully drawn, so as not to spoil. Hanging on the hook was an old but working from a tabletop 16-gauge shotgun. To be honest, I'm not a hunter. I love the subculture, but I have never killed an animal for pleasure in my life. There have been times in my life when I have had to shoot an animal, but only for self-defense or for sustenance. All the horn skins, and even the wolf skull that hung on the walls in the cabin, I bought from hunters for entourage. I'm not for bones, and I'm a pacifist. And if necessary, I can shoot even a man. But satisfying my ego by killing animals is not my thing. Being an antique dealer, a lot of interesting things pass through my hands, but as a rule, I sell everything. But the stuff that involves hunting sticks to my hands. Not many people know that a lot of hunting culture items are sold at European auctions. I will not say that they are exorbitant prices, but the cost in money equivalent of some artifacts bites. Much of what is now hanging on the walls of my hut, I bought in Europe. Agree that the hunting culture there is many times higher than in our country. I once went hunting in the Berezniki district. A bunch of scowling men with automatic rifles arrived. The hunters drove several boars at them, which they shot as if from a machine gun, then booed the carcasses, discarding the hides. The final is predictable. General drunkenness, specific individuals of the female sex, and a terrible hangover. No romance, no duel with the wild beast, nothing. Killed, skinned, dismembered, got drunk, got lost and drove off. Litter the forest in the process. That's all hunting. Once at the flea market, one intelligent old man was selling an antique hunting rock from Latin, covered with greenish mortgage rock noodles, natural leather. And hanging on laces. I immediately made a stand. An antique, and more importantly, an infrequent item. The seller asked quite a manageable amount for me, and I did not haggle. Bought this hunting artifact. The rock is needed in hunting to set off the hounds of hounds or greyhounds. Its piercing melodic sound can be heard far away in the woods or field. I didn't have a dog, but I hung the horn along with my rifle on my elk skins and hide. I threw on the community tulip I had brought here back in the fall, and I went out before going to bed to breathe the frosty air. It was quiet. The silver moon brightly illuminated the tops of the snow-covered trees, trailing a silvery path to my house. I took a deep breath of the icy cold air and coughed. Frost rubbed my throat. Silence. No animal or bird made a voice. Even the cheeky codforty lurked somewhere. In the afternoon, even in the coldest weather, the forest is full of life. Saps try to pick under the frozen bark. Bugs huddle together in flocks of nettles, and finches feast on birch seeds. Flocks of crows piercingly cut circles over the pines in search of prey. Small forest birds huddle together on bare branches, trying to hide from the cold and predators in the silence. I thought I could hear the tree branches cracking from the frost. I looked at the snow-covered fir trees and realized that winter had finally arrived. Soon the first real frost would come. I admired the sleeping, gloomy forest, but for some reason an uneasiness grew in me that could not be explained suddenly. I felt someone's unkind gaze on me. I even shuddered with apprehension. I looked around. No one was there. Was I imagining things? God forbid. A rogue bear shows up. I don't want it on my head. I'm used to trusting my senses, or should I say instinct. That animal, subconscious sense of impending danger. It's never failed me. Not in war, not in everyday life. So there's something or someone here. The bright light of the full moon seemed to play on my nerves in a shimmering silvery glow, and charcoal on the blackness. The roses that surrounded the hut seemed to faintly wave their branches like hands changing pose. When was I Morgan? Or averted his gaze from them for a moment and crept closer to the house. With some sinister intent known only to them, I began to dream that the trees around me were whispering among themselves, waiting for a signal, after which they would rush at me and do something terrible. Trying not to look scared, I went back into the house. I locked the front door with a heavy steel deadbolt. By the way, the door opened outward, and it was almost impossible to break it down. And at that moment, a chilling howl came from outside. It couldn't have belonged to any animal I knew. I'll be honest, I've seen a lot of things in my life, but now a chill ran down my spine and my hands trembled. I took the gun off the wall, put a cartridge in the chamber, and pointed it at the door. Then I took the sharply sharpened axe off the rack and leaned it against the wall beside me. Gingerly, I looked out the small window, but saw only a slice of moonlit, snowy woods. My brain played a cruel trick on me, inevitably plunging me into a nightmare world. I would suddenly remember hunters missing without a trace in these parts, and it made me feel even worse. I remembered my grandfather telling me that forest roads become impassable and dangerous in such studio frosts. Only a lucky chance and prayer could save a lonely traveler from the wickedness rampant at this time of year. My hand instinctively stung. A silver talisman in the shape of a spear hung on my chest as well, keeping my fingers on the trigger. I was trying to see something in the small one, and the end of it was peering at the locked door and couldn't decide what to do next. The howling had not resumed, but someone was circling stubbornly around the hut. I could clearly hear the crunch of snow under its paws and the crack of branches breaking. Expectation of danger is much scarier than the danger itself, even if it is deadly, but the visible fear of the unknown. Realizing this, I began to calm down. There was even anger awakened in me. Hell no. Will you take me? I've gotten out of worse. You can't just take me. Suddenly, I wanted to see an unknown enemy. Without an enemy, there is no battle without a battle, no victory. And I ventured warily, listening to the sounds outside the hut. I slowly began to walk toward the door. Well, it was time to gain some certainty, even if it was deadly for me. Holding the rifle by the butt of the neck with my right hand, I pulled back the deadbolt and swung the door open with a kick of my foot. There was no one. Only the dark, silent wall of woods that densely surrounded the house and the bone-chilling cold. What was it? An obsession, an unconscious primitive fear of the forest, passed on in the genes through a generation. I went around the hut, but found no one but footprints. I'm not much of a tracker, but I'd never seen such big bear-like tracks. They were buried deep in the snow, so they must have belonged to a beast of great size, at least bigger than a bear. What kind of beast was it? I didn't know. No one else had been out at night. But I could smell something cautiously walking around the hut and trying to peer into the small, and the end more like a hospital. I slept badly. I lay half lying down, clutching my rifle and axe to me. Then fell into slumber, then awake. Finally, morning came. I shook my head, trying to chase away the remnants of sleep. What was it? Could I have dreamed it all? I took off my taffet, threw on my tulu, and climbed out of the hut. I looked for my skis. They were where I'd left them, under the canopy, close to the wall. The frost had subsided by morning, but it still clung to my nose and bit my cheeks. The dazzling white winter sun shone in the sky. We had to get out of here and go home. But to do that, I had to walk about 10 kilometers to an abandoned trophy factory. There I left the car. There was no way to drive it to the hut. I went back to the house, filled the stove almost to the point of burning, and began to pack. I hid the rifle in a hiding place from daredevils. Who knows who visits my dwelling without me? I took with me a small, razor-sharp tourist hatchet, which I bought in sporting goods back in Soviet times. I closed the door, put on my skis, and set off. According to my calculations, I should reach that factory in 2 hours. We fastened skis on the frosty snow. We trampled deep tracks. I was rhythmically shuffling my feet, helping myself with poles. The terrain was mostly flat, although a few times I had to roll between small fir trees on low slides. At that moment, my brain woke up again and screamed for all it was worth, a sense of danger. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a movement. An indistinct shadow flashed among the tree trunks. Ahead of me, the forest was closing in on my road, a very convenient place for an attack. Some beast was cheering me silently through the scrap storms. I was almost running. The parade of my breath must have been bigger than steam engine smoke. There was no more strength left. At last I climbed a high hill. At its bottom, at its very foot, protruded out of the snow the half-ruined buildings of a trophy factory abandoned before the war. I thought I could even see my car on the highway to the small railroad car depot. I was frantically thinking of what to do. Ahead was a gentle slope pulling the highway all the way to the factory. Here and there, the tops of small fir trees and koryak trees were sticking out of the snow. There was no way out. I pushed off with my poles from behind, slid down the slope, fixed my skis on the snowy virgin land, and tree trunks flashed around me. In my head pulse was only one thought, only not to fall. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw how something huge, parachute black with red undercoat, huge jumps, carried Steenie course, turning from snags and sticking out of the snow to her. The plant was rapidly approaching. By inertia, I literally flew into the open rusty gate and braked a few meters away from the car, shaking my skis off my feet. I pressed the central lock button on the remote, yanked the handle. The front doors. The door was like glued, frozen shut. I yanked several times, almost ripping the handle out. No effect. The door wouldn't open. Behind me, I heard the stinking breath of the creature. I pulled out my axe and pressed my back against the car. A few meters away from me stood a huge, scary beast, black in underground hair, a muzzle, something reminiscent of a gorilla. Sharp fangs, huge paws with sharp claws sticking out of its mouth. The beast stood on its hind legs and looked at me curiously. I saw no aggression in its appearance, only interest. I pulled the handle again. The door creaked open a couple seconds later, and I was already inserting the key into the ignition. The engine started at once and charged smoothly, despite the frost. The beast, standing motionless, only tilted your head to the side. I balled my hand across the back seat and pulled a loaf of white bread out of the bag. I rolled down the window and tossed it to the beast. He stood up on 4 paws and leaned over the treat. He touched the gift with his paw a few times and carefully took the bread with his teeth. The loaf instantly disappeared into the toothy jaws. The beast sneezed quite dog-like, turned, and leisurely sank towards the forest. I arrived in the city at night. All the way I was shaking with excitement. It was only when the lights of the suburbs flashed that I was a little relieved. It is now I, remembering the events of those days, so chipper, but then almost went crazy with fear. Driving up the driveway, I did not drive the car to the front entrance, but put it not far from the gate. I had a large lot, so there was plenty of room. I picked up my bag and walked to one entrance, opened the door with my key and entered the hall. Complete silence. I turned on the lights and realized there was no one on the first floor. Strange. What did I want to see? It's almost 2 o'clock. My wife's long asleep. For a while, I stood and admired how the light played on the various films hanging on the walls, real Oriental carpets and cold weapons, all that could be brought from my business trip's antique steel. As if lurking in a long barrier of carpets, hiding my deadly power for the time being, I put down my bag and went to the kitchen, poured myself a whiskey, and drank it almost in a volley. Suddenly I heard a noise. It sounded like someone even shrieked. Anxiety instantly entered my brain. I listened. It was coming from the second floor. I took the broad-bladed sword off the wall and started to climb up the stairs, trying not to knock my boots on the steps. There was the bedroom. I carefully pulled the doors open. Not a bright light burned, but I managed to make out 2 naked bodies entwined in loving ecstasy on our marital bed. My Adriana saddled and unfamiliar Poroshenko Kersey woolly, male and head tilted up, and hoarse from the swell of passion, in a voice almost shouted before me clearly came the voice of my lover rhythmically on his forehead, reading my wife. I am better than your loser. The male continued. Yes, you are the best. I love you. I realized it was time to intervene. I coughed and too. Finally I was seeing my lover, uncovered, climbed out from under my wife, and stared at me absent-mindedly. Who is it? He turned to Adriana. There was disappointment mixed with curiosity in his question. It's my husband. The wife took a risk and pulled the sheet up to her chin, and the husband almost cheerfully said the male, Go for a walk. We're not done yet. He scratched his hairy chest and went at me, clearly intending to throw me out of the room. His insolence made my eyes darken, but I quickly pulled myself together. The thought flashed through my mind that he was an immortal. For some reason it made me laugh. I threw forward my hand with a sword. The blade with a whistle cut the air on the face of the male. A bloody streak appeared. No, I struck flat. I'm not a killer. The hairy lover roared, threw himself at me. I saw it coming, and dodging his straight punch aimed at my face, I struck his hand holding the sword in the jaw. The male horde with teeth and face down fell to the floor. Did you kill him? Shrieked Adriana. It's Thomas. His boys will bury you. I didn't say anything. Dialing the police number on my cell phone. Hello. What's your emergency? I got an answer almost immediately. A stranger broke into my house. Help. He's probably trying to kill me. I yelled into the phone, faking hysterics. Then I removed a weighty steel fireplace poker from its stand and gently placed it in his hand, lying knocked out by the striped guest. Adriana looked at me in silence. The hysteria seemed to end when the lovers' heads were loaded into the car. The familiar captain took me aside. Is that what you mean? That's Thomas. He runs the market. A lawyer's coming tomorrow, and he'll probably be released. He's a vindictive bastard. Could be trouble. Thank you, Sergeyevich. I understand everything. Forewarned is forearmed. I shook the captain's hand. When I returned to the bedroom, Adriana was lying motionless, covered with a sheet. I was silent. My senses were gone. Only an unbearable pain was burning in my chest. Finally, my wife sobbed, returning to her knees and shuddering with her whole body. Adriana. I said the once favorite name with disgust. I'm going to leave now. Make the transmission downstairs so that in the morning when I wake up you won't be here." She started to say something through her tears, but I didn't listen. I quickly left the bedroom. When I woke up, Adriana was still home. She was trying to explain something to me. She was apologizing, singing an old woman's song about lack of attention, about how I'd stopped seeing her as a woman. She even went so far as to say she cheated out of great love for me. She said she'd be faithful to me for the rest of her life, until her deathbed. She said something about being forced into it, but she only loves me. At the end of her monologue, Adriana knelt down and grabbed my legs, begging for forgiveness, but something inside me snapped. I silently listened to this nonsense and wanted only one thing: to get her out of here. When the cab arrived, Adriana stood by the car for a long time, apparently still hoping for something. Then she got into the car and left my life. The next day, an unfamiliar man came to me, a lawyer, young, brisk, young man, with a long nose and long hair in a bundle, making him look like a rat. He leisurely climbed out of a large black SUV and approached my gate. The intercom buzzed. "What do you want?" I asked him rudely, looking at the screen at the uninvited guest. "Mr. Smith." There was contempt in the lawyer's voice. "We need to talk." "I don't need to." "Get out." I waited curiously for his reaction. It was obvious that the lawyer had not expected such a reception. He was silent for a while, then pressed the intercom button again. "What now?" I said unhappily. "Mr. Smith." His voice became much more courteous. "I have business with you. Please let me in." I pressed a button and the gate opened. "Mr. Smith, Thomas wants to sue you for moral damages, but he's a kind man. He wants to talk to you first." The lawyer was watching my reaction carefully. "I have nothing to talk to your landlord about. He broke into my house and assaulted me. I'm the one who should be suing him." I grinned defiantly. "Thomas was invited by your wife. He was her guest. After all, it's her house too." The lawyer wouldn't give up. "I own the house. My wife's not even registered here, so it's trespassing." I looked the guy right in the eye. "I should have just shot your Thomas." "Thomas doesn't see it that way. He's a stubborn lawyer. He wants to meet with you to discuss compensation for his injuries. Tell your master I have nothing to discuss with him. Now get out." I resolutely got up from the chair. The lawyer left silently. But I knew this was just the beginning. My cell phone was ringing. It was a familiar number. "I'm listening." I answered quickly. "I have an order. Are you home now?" The speaker immediately took the bull by the horns. "Yes, come over." Opposite me sat a middle-aged man with a slight shine on his temples. "I need antique Oriental silver. It doesn't matter what region, preferably from the 16th or 17th century." My interlocutor took a sip from his glass. "Coins, jewelry, or dishes?" I specified. "Both." The man grinned. "Preferably from Afghanistan, or at the worst from Central Asia, India." "It can be from India." The man put the glass on the table. "But what do you take or not? What is the price of the question?" I'm a little tense. The order is complicated in a troubled region. The customer named the amount. I was quite satisfied with it. "In what time frame?" I asked again. "There is no specific term. As it is done, but don't take too long." "I agree, but I have unfinished business here." I poured whiskey for myself and my guest. "I need help." In a calm voice, asked the guest. "I guess so." I took a swig of whiskey, and I started laying out my problem. "That's a bitch, life. You barely manage to recover from one blow, and then immediately get another. It's like walking through a storm of evil with your eyes closed at night, and you're scared to open your eyes. Suddenly you'll fall on a limb, and you'll be left without an eye. That's why you rely on your hands. You cover your face with one hand and put the other one forward so that you don't bump your forehead or nose on the trunk. Have you seen a child's merry-go-round? Everything goes in a circle. Horses, deer, goats. Everybody goes back to the beginning, and back again. The next round, and on and on. Animals. Carousel. It probably feels like they're moving forward, but they're actually running in a closed circle. That's life. All the events in it repeat themselves with enviable regularity. Someone said that life is a spiral. Everything in it develops in an ascending order. Alas, it is not. At least not for me. A few years ago, I fell in love with a girl who happened to come my way. Her name was Kathy. I said her name, and the sweetness from the volume spilled over my body. How many years has it been? I still can't get over it. I thought she had a crush on me, too. But I guess that was just me. I had to leave urgently. There was something I couldn't put off. I left her the keys and asked her to wait for me. She promised to wait as long as it took. She said beautiful words about love and fidelity. But when I came back, she was gone. In the drawer were the keys to the house and nothing else. No answer, no hello. She didn't even leave a note. I searched for her for almost a year, quit my job, picked up all my friends, used all my connections, but Kathy just vanished into thin air. I searched morgues and hospitals, asylums and prisons, but to no avail. No trace of her. Somehow, in a drunken delirium, I thought she'd come from outer space. There was no other explanation. It took me another year to come to my senses. I never thought it was possible to fall in love with a woman who wasn't remarkable. She didn't have model looks or any outstanding charisma. She was just a girl of many kinds. But it so happened that without her I had no life. But time passed. Gradually her image began to blur. Life in any case dictates its own rules. I slowly began to return to normal. There were orders again, and therefore money. And where there is money, sooner or later a woman starts. That's how Adriana appeared on my horizon, a young, beautiful party girl. She had me by the balls. We met at some party, dedicated. I do not remember what I did not particularly get after the ladies, poured myself, and gradually kicked. The day before I had returned from another business trip, and I had money to drink. I was looking for an excuse to get away quickly. It was unbearable to be among the party, office plankton and major of these girls with fake breasts and one twist in the head. But at some point, a young female character landed next to me. Without entering into unnecessary polemics, she poured wine into my glass, not forgetting herself. "Why be sad?" she asked after we'd had our drinks. I shrugged. I didn't feel like talking. So handsome and all alone. The girl wouldn't stop. "My name is Adriana, and you're the one who's been brought here." That's the first thing I thought of. I had absolutely no desire to spread my tail and start the mating dance. But the maiden did not miss the initiative, seeing that her efforts in them me ineffective. She withdrew to the second line of defense and went on the counterattack. Stupid party. She started from afar, pouring me more wine. It's strange to feel alone in a crowd. "What's stopping you from leaving here?" I muttered languidly. "Call a cab and go." My cell phone was dead. Adriana looked hopefully into my eyes. "If you want, I can help you." Those were fateful words. Only I realized it much later. Another glass of wine. And now I'm sitting in a cab next to Adriana. No, she didn't come onto me. Didn't get in my pants. She was sitting next to me, just like a caring friend. Then it turned out she'd forgotten the money. I paid off the driver and went up to her so she could pay me back. It was all sewn up in white threads, like the debt couldn't be paid back later or forgiven at all. It was just that I was already drunk and had trouble perceiving reality. In the morning, I woke up in bed with Adriana. I had no rejection. But as long as it happened, so be it. If not Adriana, then some other friend. No difference at all. 2 months later, we got married. It wasn't a big wedding, but it was elaborate, with important guests and a few relatives. We lived in my house. All the property belonged to me. The store and the antique firm, too. We didn't have a prenuptial agreement, but it was impossible to get anything away from me, except for the car I'd given her. But that was a drop in the bucket. We had no children. Adriana took her time. I didn't insist, like I had a premonition. But my wife was head over heels in social life. Girlfriends, parties, going out. But no sign of infidelity. Always home on time. Phone B, he during our life together. No one has ever cut me in the eye behavior Adriana in public without me all rank and noble. And then there's the affair with the market director Thomas. Honestly, I didn't understand why I was younger than her lover. I didn't deny her anything. Sex almost every day, which is what she lacked. I didn't go into the moral and psychological details of married life. Women are a pain in the ass to understand. They say they don't understand themselves sometimes. But the fact of infidelity was, as they say, obvious. No doubt I was worried, but not as much as I was after Kathy disappeared. Resentment mixed with bewilderment, a slight ache in my heart and soul. No matter what anyone says, no husband is ready to calmly accept his wife's infidelity. It is not pleasant to suddenly learn that for several years lived with an empty person on whom he spent the warmth of his soul. They say that between love and hate is a very thin line. Perhaps it is so. I was more than surprised when I realized that the love I did feel was just a fading fire that quickly went out. In the days that followed, as a clown friend of mine used to say, it's not my circus and it's not my monkeys. Well, in the end, I liked the single life better. So with Sam's release, I filed for divorce. And while that was going on, I started getting ready for a trip down south. But no such luck. Adriana was determined to take half my business and my house. It's a well-known fact that lawyers can do anything for a lot of money. My ex-wife didn't have that kind of money, so her lover fit right in. It's hard to say what motivated him, but it certainly wasn't love. Most likely a desire to get back at me for the humiliation and broken face. 2 days later, my lawyer contacted me and informed me that they were filing a lawsuit for property division. I realized that legally they had no chance, so other methods of persuasion would be used. And I seemed to know what they were. A week later, Adriana's nimble attorney set up a meeting to resolve, as he put it, the contentious issues. As I expected, the lawyer was an old acquaintance of mine. Yes, the one who looked like a rat. I brought my firm's attorney to the meeting, not so much to help as a witness. Apparently, the meeting was designed to intimidate me into sharing my property and money with a poor, abandoned woman. I decided to play the fool to fully understand their devious plans. Adriana outdid herself. Black, austere clothes, a veil over her face. She was grieving hard for the family I'd destroyed. It was mostly her lawyer who spoke. He talked at length about Adriana's unhappy fate, about her misstep, and about forgiveness. Finally, he got to the point, without a second's hesitation. He offered to amicably divide my firm and other property as compensation for my wife's better years with me. He made such a face that I had no doubt what would happen to me if I refused. I sat silent and occasionally blinking my eyes, playing the complete idiot. Even my lawyer shook his head doubtfully and tried to object to the rat, but he immediately shut his mouth and looked at me expectantly. I stood up, shaking off my sucker mask, and said only one word, no, as I was leaving the meeting room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the rat dialing someone's number on his iPhone. In the evening, 2 big men and Adriana's lawyer came to see me. My security guard escorted them to my office. Of course, the presence of security in my house somewhat discouraged the lawyer. He didn't expect me to be so eager, but nevertheless, he got right down to business. For almost an hour he frightened me with all kinds of consequences of my refusal, but he didn't threaten me directly. I withstood his diarrhea of words and sent him away. From what I had heard, I realized I had to strike a preemptive strike and end this balaghanza. I looked at my wristwatch. 12:30 at night. The landlord's late. Quiet. His family's visiting from home, so we won't be disturbed. I rode in the chair. I wanted to smoke, but the smoke would give me away right away. I can't help it. I'll have to do without smoking for now. I heard a noise from the street. More V's are coming. Well, finally, the front door slammed and heavy footsteps were heard. The door opened and a carcass clad in a black coat came tumbling into the room. I saw Thomas's hand reach for the light switch. No need to turn on the light. My words sounded like the voice of an angel on Judgment Day. The fat man froze and slowly turned in my direction. "Who are you?" With difficulty, he squeezed the words out of himself. "A horse in a coat." I couldn't deny myself a joke. "Sit down. We'll talk." I pointed to the chair across from me. Thomas understood my gesture correctly and slowly lowered himself into the chair. Gradually, he began to come to his senses. For about 20 minutes, I listened to Kareem talk about what Kareem would subject me to for breaking into his house. He even tried to call security, but no one came to his shouting. Then he started talking. I will not recount the text of my monologue. It wasn't very long. The gist of it is that if he gets in my way again, I will cut him off. No, not what you think. Just his head. At those words, I turned on the floor lamp, and Thomas saw right in front of him on the coffee table, bleeding, the severed head of his dog, the head of his favorite marble dog, Hector, as fat as his owner. You should have seen the horror in the eyes of my wife's lover. He seemed to swallow his tongue in fear. The silent scene lasted about a minute. Then his cell phone rang. Thomas pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands. I quickly snatched it up and put it on speakerphone. Someone in a panic had informed Tolstoy, the market director, that the food warehouses were on fire. I looked at Thomas. I thought I was more than convincing. I could have blown up his car for the last time. But that was overkill. I got up and walked out, leaving my master to admire the head of his favorite dog. Walking down the dark corridor, I had to step several times over the bodies lying in picturesque poses, knocked out by the guards' stun guns. Two dark figures separated from the wall. "Let's go." I spoke quietly. "How's that dog sleeping on its hind legs?" The man in black smirked. "Did you really think I really killed the dog?" "Of course not. I'm an animal lover. But you have to admit, a rubberhead can be pretty impressive too." The divorce went smoothly. I was alone in court, and the whole thing took a little while. In order for a business trip to be successful, you need to prepare, surf the internet, go to the library. Not everything you need for your work can be found online. Wikipedia is nothing but a big virtual dumping ground, where everyone dumps unverified junk. But I didn't want unreliable data and information. My life was at stake, so it was impossible to make a mistake. The frosty winter evening seemed endless. Putting aside Keller's Guide to Antique Oriental Silver, I pampered myself with a Cuban cigar stuffed into the corner of an old leather sofa, a dark lampshade. The floor lamp cast a sharply defined circle of light on the floor, while the rest of the room was hidden in semi-darkness behind the wide glass door leading to the front porch. The frost was crackling, and the fluffy snow in the flower beds shimmered silver, sweat still and full of moonlight. The loneliness did not depress me. I always found something to do, especially when I was preparing to dive into another expedition. And if truth be told, I didn't want to socialize. I was a stranger to my neighbors. I'd disappear for long periods of time, and then reappear. They didn't seem to realize it. I was working, and that was good. Less they know, more they sleep. I smelled smoke, put the chicken cigar in an antique Latin ashtray. I got up and went into the kitchen, poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a pre-prepared glass, threw in a few pieces of ice, and took a big gulp. And at that moment the intercom rang. It was already 11:30 p.m. on the ancient ship's clock. I wondered who it was at this late hour. I reluctantly approached the background on the screen. In the not bright lantern light, saw a woman standing near my gate. She was wearing a dark fur coat and some kind of shawl, tangled up to her eyes. She didn't look like anyone I knew. "I wonder who that is. Who do you need a sip of whiskey?" I asked into the intercom microphone. "I need the owner," the woman said distinctly, leaning her gloveless hand against the brick fence. I had more questions, but I suddenly felt sorry to keep a stranger in the cold. So I opened the gate. "Come in," on the camera. I saw the woman, staggering, walked to the native porch. "Is she drunk?" The first thing I thought, the woman with difficulty climbed the steps and was already standing in front of the front door. "Hello, I can come in," quietly mumbled the unexpected guest. "Come into the hall." I let her in and closed the door behind her. "No, I don't think she's drunk." The woman hesitantly walked into the brightly lit hallway and stopped, looking at me confused. I even shuddered inwardly. Large blue eyes looked at me, curious and slightly wary. "Take off your coat and give me your handkerchief." The stranger took off the slightly snowy artificial fur coat, remaining in an incomprehensible color woolen dress, which lightened her well-composed small figure, unwrapped on a warm-down coat, handkerchief, and with her eyes began to look for hangers. I, finally coming to my senses, politely took the clothes from her hands to the guest and hung them carefully on the hangers. She dragged the boots off her feet and looked at me questioningly. I was speechless for a moment. Standing in front of me was a charming young girl. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why had she come? These questions swirled around in my head, but I could find no answer. I didn't know many girls in this city, especially such charming ones. I stood silently for a while, trying not to look the stranger in the face. The pause was clearly dragging on. "Come in. I'll give you some hot tea." A gallant and hospitable host began to awaken in me. "Sit down on the sofa." The girl went further into the hall. Looking around curiously, she stopped near the carpet with weapons, silently looking at the deadly steel and Orsa for a while. Then she looked at me, smiled, and finally took a seat on the couch tentatively in her dress. Leaving my guest in the hall, I made my way to the kitchen, collected the kettle, removed the boiling water in the stock pots, found some carcasses, and all this splendor neatly arranged on the coffee table. The girl carefully took the cup, took a polite sip, and looked at me. "So, what can I do for you?" I asked politely. "Are you Smith, Yuri Pavlovich?" asked the stranger, carefully putting the cup with hot tea on a plate. "That's right. With whom do I have the honor?" I said in a social tone. I felt like I'd even let my tail wag in front of the stranger. "My name is Betty." I shrugged. "I have very important business with you." She raised her blue eyes to me. "Do you remember Kathy?" I choked with surprise. Kathy. My heart pounded traitorously so the girl wouldn't see my excitement. I got up and walked to the window. Man changes with time, but love doesn't die. It can lurk somewhere inside and wait for its time to make your heart beat faster again. But I've really changed. New thoughts, views, passions, sadness, and joy. Sometimes I feel sorry for the old me, but I can't go back. And there's no reason to. I lit a cigarette and opened the window. Outside the window still rained frost and glitter. The fluffy snow shimmered silver under the moonlight, and the hall was warm. The fireplace was burning in the corner. Occasionally there was a crackle and a fierce spark, but for some reason, a chill ran down my spine. "Excuse me, how old are you?" I asked the guest. A tactless question. "Does it matter?" Betty shrugged. "You didn't answer my question." She looked me carefully in the eye. I held her gaze. "Yes, I remember Kathy. She lived here for a while. And then she disappeared without leaving a note." I leaned back in my chair. Memories of Kathy hurt me. I'd been looking for her, but to no avail. That was it, really. I wasn't going to open my heart to a stranger, even one as charming as Betty. The girl was silent for a while, as if deciding whether or not to speak further. "You couldn't find her." It was evident that Betty was struggling to say the words. "Until I met you." Kathy was friends with a guy named Michael. They were getting married. They'd already bought the rings. But then she met you. Kathy lost her head. She fell in love with you after you left. She waited patiently. But then her aunt arrived, your housekeeper. I don't know what happened between them, but she kicked Kathy out, and she had to come home. Michael found out she'd come back, found her and beat her badly. At home, she was abused too, called the town whore. One day, Michael showed up at their house and asked her to marry him. Kathy had no choice, so she said yes. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought it was Michael's baby. For almost a year and a half, they lived more or less tolerably well. And then Michael started looking at the baby, trying to find a resemblance to himself. He got the idea that it wasn't his daughter. He took a DNA test and it all came out. That night, he beat Kathy again. He screamed that she was a bad woman, a cuckoo who slipped him a fattened child. Michael took all his wife's jewelry, even her wedding ring. He beat her almost every day, and she couldn't take it anymore. One day, when Michael was at work, Kathy took the baby and went to live with me in my second cousin's house. I was renting a room in a communal apartment. Michael didn't try to find her. A month later, he filed for divorce. Kathy didn't object. The three of us lived together for almost 2 months. Kathy didn't work, and we all lived on my salary. But we were desperately short of money. So Kathy decided to go to Moscow to earn money. She left the child with me and left. She couldn't take her daughter with her because she was going nowhere. Before she left, she told me about you and that the child was yours. I had some money. I bought her a ticket to Moscow. Then Kathy wrote that she got a job as a waitress in a cafe. That's where she met Sebastian. He was studying in Moscow and was taking his final exams this year. Sebastian started courting her. They know how to round a knave fool's head. Promised to marry. Offered to go to his parents in Latvia. No more letters from Kathy. Where is she now? And what about her? I don't know. But why didn't she find me? I almost screamed. Especially if it's my baby. She knew I was back when she ran away from Michael. She came to see you, but she was met by a young woman who called herself your wife. She kicked Kathy out and said if she shows up again, she'll have to deal with the police. Betty took a sip from her cup. When Kathy got married, she changed her last name. That's why you haven't found her. I was lost for a while. Where's the girl now? I asked when I came to my senses. She's with me. I left her at a friend's house so I wouldn't have to drag her out in the cold. Betty sighed heavily. I wouldn't have dared. But I was made redundant a month ago. Christina and I have nothing to live on. The girl covered her face with her palms and burst into tears. Frankly, I was shocked. I had no reason not to believe the guest. Everything she told me was logical. What do you want me to do? I asked Betty. I want to ask you for some money. We'll go back home for the first time, and I won't bother you again. Betty spoke quickly, as if she was afraid I would throw her out. I've been promised a job. She didn't finish. It was clear to me. It wasn't a job. Are you hungry? Unexpectedly, I asked. She looked at me in surprise. Let's go to the kitchen to get something to eat, and then we'll go get Veronica. I hailed a cab, and we drove almost to the outskirts of town. At the old house, a friend of Betty's had rented a room under a pile of codswallop. We found a little girl. She cuddled up to Betty with her little arms around her neck. I'm hungry. The baby cried softly. The girl stroked her head affectionately. I tried to take Christina in my arms, but she screamed with fear and clung even tighter to Betty. When we got home, I cooked dinner with Betty's help because I had no idea what a small child could eat. Then I took the guests to my bedroom and put them to bed. I got up early, made coffee, poured myself a big cup, and sat down in the kitchen. I had made my decision overnight and was now waiting for Betty to wake up. Did I believe her? Yes and no. At least I decided to take a DNA test, and then we'll see. I didn't call my mother. She had enough on her mind as it was. She lived with Katya, my niece, so I didn't bother her yet. Betty came into the kitchen, and I poured her coffee and slid her some water and toast. As soon as Christina woke up, we'd leave. She adjusted her dress. Thank you. Tears came to her eyes again. What's the matter? Why is that? Do women always cry for everything? I'll tell you what. How's your jaw going to work out? It's hard to predict. In any case, the baby needs to be fed and clothed. If you don't mind, I'd like to hire you as a housekeeper. You'll live here with the baby. The money I gave you Consider it an advance. I put a card in front of her. This is for groceries and clothes. Buy whatever you need for your child. Do you have a cell phone? Betty shook her head in the negative. I slid her the box with the new iPhone in it. You'll figure it out on your own. She nodded quickly. My cell phone and the driver's cell phone are already in there. If you need to go anywhere, call and they'll take you. As soon as Christina wakes up and eats breakfast, we'll go to the lab and take the DNA test. I'm leaving soon and I want to know the results before I go. I said all that in one breath. So, any objections or not? Betty shook his head in the negative. 6 days later, the DNA test was ready. I was not the girl's father. Betty read the test results and looked up at me. God, what are we going to do now? She sounded doomed. Don't think, we'll leave right away. I'm so sorry. I didn't even think it could be like this. I was sure Christina was your daughter. She put the card on the table and went to the second floor to get Christina. Wait, I slammed my palm on the capital. What exactly has changed? I need a housekeeper anyway, especially since I'm going away, maybe for a long time. By the way, Lena's coming today. She'll be with you while I'm away. The baby will be enough for you, Betty. The girl looked at me in surprise. So I can stay, she said. Of course you can. You work for me. Everything stays the way it was. I grinned. Yes, everything repeats itself. A few years ago, I also said goodbye to the girl I loved and asked her to wait for me. The circle had closed. I was about to get into a cab when Betty asked to come with me to the airport. I didn't mind. As I checked in for my flight and headed to the pogrom control area, Betty suddenly kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Come back soon." As I passed through border control, I turned around. 2 girls, big and small, were waving at me. I could see tears on Betty's face. After a 6-hour flight, the plane landed safely at the airport of one of the Central Asian republics. Barely had I gone through all the post-flight formalities and stepped into the welcoming hall, my gaze caught a familiar face from the dense crowd. Jack. I had no doubt that he would be the one to greet me. I raised my hand, signaling that I was seeing an old friend. "Hello, brother," dressed in a long robe of camel and wool and skullcap. He gave me a hug. "Long time no see." "Hello, Jack. I was genuinely happy to see you. Almost 5 years. Let's go to my car." Jack picked up my bag, and we went to the exit from the airport. We looped through the narrow streets of the ancient southern city. Our car finally pulled into a narrow gate and stopped in the shade of the heat. A young woman, fast server, taken, gave Orhan. Seeing us, covered her face and bowed. Jack said something to her in an unfamiliar language. She bowed once more and disappeared into the house. "Did you get married?" I looked at the woman and turned to my friend. Jack took off his robe and threw it carelessly next to the cushions. But I'm not an old man. I didn't go any further into that subject. We settled around a low table covered with a colored tablecloth. The young woman poured the tea in half and disappeared back into the house. Education, though. Then we ate for a long time, washing down the food with flavored tea. Jack asked about the health of my loved ones. He was saddened to learn of the circumstances of my younger brother's death. "Did you get your revenge?" he asked me. "Yes, briefly. As a man should," I answered. My friend nodded contentedly. Dusk began to fall. The hot southern sun slowly crept over the horizon. The heat began to subside. Soon we heard the cry of my Odin calling to the evening Maghrib. It looked like there was a mosque nearby. While Jack performed the threefold prayer, I managed to drink 2 cups of flavored tea. When it became dark, a silent woman lit several lanterns, illuminating the place where we were seated. From the darkness, the loud rolling of the CKAD and the rustling of bat wings could be heard before us. There is a ruin of an ancient tower not far away. There are a lot of bats there. They hunt at night and sometimes fly in here, Jack said. As if reading my mind, we finally got down to business. I briefly told my friend the essence of the problem, without going into details. Why burden a good man with unnecessary information? Especially since I have to work moderately anyway. There's no point in going. Jack said, wishing with his lips. It's dangerous to go beyond the river. The teachers are running rampant there now. They hit the Americans well and will soon take control of the whole country. We need to go southeast to Sea Valley. You might find something there. But we can look here too. I nodded in agreement. Very few of their caravans passed through the country beyond the river, so it is unlikely to find anything of value there. But in the Samara Valley you can search. There may be coins and silverware, just what I need. I'll look here, maybe I'll find something. After a pause, Jack continued, You take my car, gear, weapons, and head southeast. You'll pick up your car papers and gun permit tomorrow. He shouted something into the darkness, and a light came on in the doorway. Let's go inside and get some rest. Jack nudged me with his hand toward the house. The silent woman led me into a small room with a bed and a small table. A copper basin and a pitcher of water stood on the table. She pointed to the bed and said something. I nodded in response, though I understood nothing. The woman said another short phrase and left. I stripped off my clothes, slept, ran cold water over my face, and laid down on the bed. It was still hot, and I did not cover myself with white sheets covering my eyes. I lay there and remembered the events of the last time. Too many of them had come upon me. I was awakened by a slight rustle and the gentle touch of someone's hand on my chest. I wanted to ask who was here, but a soft, lavender-scented hand gently clamped my mouth shut. A woman's light and smooth body came over me. The unfamiliar woman was kissing my breasts, stroking my lower abdomen. From the surprise, I lost my ability to resist, and everything happened. There was no disappointment. The warm southern night, soaked with love and oriental delights, did its work as the naked young woman slid into my arms with a quiet tone. Responding to my kisses in my soul, calm and peace was born for the first time in a while. As I fell asleep, gently cuddling the submissive woman's body, I remembered Jack's words. I'm not an old man. My conscience was at peace. I was awakened by the aroma of fresh emergency coffee. Jack sat squinting into the rising sun, holding a cup of hot drink in his hand. I quickly washed my face and joined my old friend. How restful. Taking a sip, Jack looked at me. Rahim, I haven't slept like that in a while. I tried to catch the subtext in my host's words, but it was as if he was reading my mind. It was Camille. She's a widow. Her husband died in the desert a year ago. It's a good thing they didn't have any children. She lives in my house now. Did she like you at first sight, as they say? Jack added something in his own language. I lowered my eyes. Well, after all, it was her choice. We drank another cup of coffee. Finally, Jack slid a large diamond bag toward me. On top covered a netted assault rifle with a magazine attached. Lying there was a Kalashnikov assault rifle. On the side, I fumbled for 2 fully infected horns. 3 is enough, Jack commented. You're not going to war. In the bag, there was still a knife with a long, wide blade from the old war times artillery binoculars, wrapped in a desert-colored sniper's cape. At the very bottom of the bag lurked a familiar 1911 Colt and a spare magazine with ammunition, ID, groceries, and everything else in the car. You'll figure it out later. Jack stood up. God bless you, Adriana. There was a shriek, and the door showed Camille in its opening. Not paying attention to Jack, she ran up to me and hugged me. As I left town, I was followed by a long scream. The car was rushing down a sun-cracked highway, cutting the red sands into almost 2 equal parts. The road was laid out along an old caravan route. Back in Soviet times, the thermometer on the dashboard read plus 47 degrees. The engine was running at a breakneck pace. The arrow of the temperature gauge was inexorably rejoicing at the 100 mark. I sat in the driver's seat, open warm robe, under which there was only 1 swimming trunks. It was the only way to escape the heat, and not for long. Periodically on the horizon flashed mountain peaks, and I did not realize whether they were really mountains or ghostly mirages. This Wade died less and less often. Through the desert drove cars destroyed from the heat asphalt for metal, wind, and the remaining few gas stations spent on the sides of the road. And all because of the heat, which burned all living things, making the vast desert even bigger. Its sands stretched all the way to the Aral Sea. I remembered Jack telling me that in his childhood in these places gardens bloomed and water rivers flowed. Now all this is in the past. The only source of moisture is seasonal short rains, and even those had long ago lost their unequal battle. The sun was steadily rolling toward dusk, but it was still mercilessly burning the dry air. The desert wind pondered the tops of the sandy velvets, throwing hot sand on the road. The day was leaning towards evening, and I realized that I would have to spend the night in the car. The only thing I was glad about was that with the setting of the sun the heat would subside and I would be able to breathe a full breath. The sun was almost touching the horizon when I drove off the highway on more or less level ground, turned off the engine, tired for the day, and started to use things, spread the seat, and put the sleeping bag. Took out of the trunk a stove with gas. I didn't want to eat. I was only thirsty. I quickly lit Gorilka and put a kettle and poured some brew into it. In such heat locals drink strong green tea, kok tea, as they call it. While the drink was being prepared, I took out of my bag an automatic rifle, took out a cartridge in a cartridge, put it on the safety, and put it on the seat. There was no habitation for many dozens of kilometers around. It was as if I was in space, but you have to be ready for any surprise. Soon I was sitting on the hood behind a glass camel and cat, and was enjoying drinking hot tea and quenching my thirst. Suddenly, the wind picked up. The sky began to nod, clouds not about a new arrow gleamed lightning, and after a while thunder rumbled right above my head. I could clearly see jets of rain appearing in the sky. I was even going to hide in the cabin. But the downpour did not fall on the common land. The rain did not reach the ground and, escaping in the air, thundered a few more times, and only one warm drop fell on my face, still reaching the ground. The wind threw a handful of sand in my face as if in mockery, like a good portion of fine shot. The clouds crept slowly northward and into the sky. First one star shone faintly, the second, and then in 5 minutes I saw the sky covered with meaningless schemes, constellations. The moon's not bright sickle was interrogating everything in dull gray tones. I went to bed early. I opened the windows a little for ventilation. I couldn't sleep for a long time. All sorts of things came into my head, but gradually fatigue took its toll, and I fell asleep. I woke up to a rustling noise. The car shook a few times. I opened my eyes sharply and looked out the window. It was darkness all around. What was it? Maybe a snake. But how big would it have to be to rock the car like that? Suddenly, a wave of black panic and unbridled fear swept over my brain. My body felt like a village. I took a deep, hysterical breath of air and arched my back. By an incredible effort of will, I forced myself to find the flashlight and turn it on. Its light trembled, fading into darkness, still the same dead emptiness. All around, I sat there wet with sweat, feeling my heart tearing out of my chest and my frequent breathing drowning out all sounds. I gradually came to myself. Panic-past thoughts stopped rushing around in my head like frenzied cockroaches. I wiped the sweat from my face with the sleeve of my robe and exhaled deeply. Maybe it was just a dream. I tried to calm myself, slipped my gaze, dedicated to the not bright color of the desert. I spotted something black, quickly dissolved into the darkness. I remembered about the automatic rifle and put it beside me. The caliber is small, but still. Besides, there's also a Colt .45 caliber pocket gun. Feeling the weapon in my hands, I almost completely recovered. I took a swig of whiskey for courage and kept quiet. Listened to the night. There was another rustle. Somewhere not far away, the sand hissed and scattered. But the car stood still, and I fell asleep again. They say that in the most deserted sandy areas of Central Asia there is a Volga, and a good one. It is a meter-long earthworm, dark red in color. It only appears on the surface during the hottest months. The local population is mystically terrified of him. After all, he is supposedly able to kill at a distance, whether spitting out a deadly poison or striking the victim with an electric shock. The legend of it is so widespread and so uniform that one has to think. At its core, it really is some extremely rare endangered animal, probably a relic of ancient times, now surviving in the most desolate corners of Central Asia. Here in the Red Sands, according to Jack, George has also been seen for a long time. He once told me that the worm appears only in the heat of June and July. Later it burrows into the ground and sleeps. The locals were sure that the worm has not gone anywhere and periodically collects tribute with human lives. Expeditions were repeatedly sent to search for the Long George. In 1954, on the territory of Inner Mongolia, worked American scientists on 2 Land Rovers. They left the settlement and disappeared without a trace at the request of the U.S. government. Mongolian authorities organized a search for the missing, found in one of the hard-to-reach areas of the Gobi. Both vehicles appeared to be derelict. 6 corpses lay nearby, as they had been exposed to the sun for a long time. The exact cause of death of the expedition members could not be established. It is assumed that they were the victim of a Long George. In the 1970s, 2 Soviet expeditions visited here in the Red Sands, trying to discover the elusive worm. They failed to catch this beastie, but they collected numerous proofs of the reality of its existence. But the results of the expeditions were not published anywhere, and they were soon forgotten by everyone except the locals. Abruptly opening my eyes, I met dusk again. Apparently, it was still early, but the heat had already gone under the pressure of the night. I tried to recall the dream, but it had already slipped away from me, leaving me with a pinched feeling of unease. The farther I traveled through the desert, the worse the road became. According to my calculations, I should reach the place by evening. The Sea Valley was nestled between mountains that already showed on the horizon in the distance. My gaze picked out a white dot. I stopped the car and pulled out my binoculars into the haze that rose from the asphalt. It was hard to make out the car. There were no people in sight. I decided to drive closer. There was no way to go around anyway. There was sand everywhere, and my car might get stuck. The closer I got, the louder the alarm bells rang in my head. Something's not right here. Just in case, I moved my automatic rifle closer, having previously taken it off the safety. The white Toyota stood with its nose in a pile of sand. The perimeter filled the road. In the cab, dropping his head on the steering wheel motionless, sat a man. His left arm hung along his torso. What was to the right I couldn't see. A little to the left, almost in the middle of the highway, a woman in jeans and a tank top was lying on her stomach. She also showed no signs of life. It looked like she was trying to get away from someone. I just don't know why she jumped out of the car. Maybe she was fleeing from the driver. I didn't hurry to turn off the engine and get out of the car. My brain was working hard, analyzing the situation. How long have they been here? No one overtook me. So they had driven here earlier, at least for a day. In this heat, the cadaveric end comes more slowly, but you can still see that the corpses are stale, and these are like cucumbers, as if just out of the shower. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the driver's arm hanging loosely along the body. There was a barely perceptible tremor. Doubt scattered like shrapnel from a grenade. Ambush. I knocked out the first speed while simultaneously lowering the right window. The car lurched forward in an arc, avoiding the woman lying there. One thought drilled into my brain, just so I wouldn't get stuck in the sand. With my right hand, I raised my automatic and fired a short burst, right at the driver of the Toyota. You could see the bullets fit into his body. He jerked a few times like a rag doll on a string and fell out of the cab. It looked like he was dead. For real now. A gun fell out of his right hand onto the sand. but I couldn't see the model on the left side of the road. There was a burst of gunfire. I could hear the bullets thudding against the side of my car. I stepped on the gas, and then the thing I was so afraid of happened. The car came to a stop, bogged down in a sandy recount. I opened the left door and, firing, rolled out onto the sand. A machine gun line whipped back. As fire burned my left forearm, I felt blood oozing down my arm. But the arm worked, so it was tangential. Did I get a fix on where the shot came from? I got the machine gun in the curves of my arm. I timed it just right when the enemy would try to finish me off, cut him off with a short burst. I didn't know how much ammo I had left. There was no way to get a spare magazine. There was still a woman left. In the silence, only the crunch of sand under heavy boots was heard. I leaned against the car, took the cooking machine, and began to wait. It's like a game here. Who's faster? Finally, I saw a shadow fall from behind the car. The sun was shining in their backs over the sand, and a head in a baseball cap appeared. My machine gun jerked, ejecting the last shell casing, and at my feet fell the body of the woman who had been lying on the road. I sat still for a few minutes, waiting for an attack, but all was quiet. I slowly crawled into the seat and turned the ignition key. The engine started instantly. Everything was normal. I carefully backed up, then took a slight right and pulled the car to a stop after driving through the sand. The wound was bandaged first. It hurt, but had to be tolerated. The wound wasn't dangerous, but I gave myself a shot of anesthetic just in case. I didn't touch the bodies. Couple of days and they'd be gone. There's a lot of dead people around here. I looked at the Toyota, but I couldn't find anything. 3 characters, all lying in the sand, no sign of life. Picked up the gun that had fallen out of the driver's hand, a Barrett 96 nice car. I stuffed the trophy with a full magazine behind my belly belt and walked to my car. Soon a bleak desert landscape stretched on both sides of the road. After 60 kilometers, some buildings appeared ahead. As I got closer, I realized that it was an old caravan shed, miraculously preserved. I drove leisurely under the archway and found myself in the courtyard, where in the center there was once a small fountain with water. I got out of the car and walked under the shade. One of the arches, there were no people in sight. If they were hiding from the burning of the driving sun inside. But the yard was well maintained, and in places the wall where it needed it, or had chipped away, someone had reapplied fresh clay, and that had dried quickly under the pressure of the fierce light. I looked around the buildings, but there were no people. Maybe no one lives here all the time. Maybe they come here once in a while. The question is, why? As an inn, these buildings themselves, and lived in one of the rooms. I found a few antique jugs, mostly Latin, but there were a couple of silver ones. I threw them in the car. We had to drive to get into the valley by daylight. Finally, the road bumped into the mountains. It meandered between the rocks until it popped out to George's more often than not a mountain stream. It was getting cooler. Instead of sheep, trees appeared along the road. I realized I had reached my goal. An hour later, I entered a small village. But there was electricity and, most importantly, a bazaar. That's where I was going tomorrow morning. I stayed in a small hotel with the proud name of hotel. The room had a shower and a toilet. What more could a companion ask for? I ate some leftover rations and went to bed. The road had washed me clean. The trip turned out to be more than successful. In addition to the order itself, I had purchased something for myself. A day later, I filled 2 more cans of gasoline in the car and headed back. I had to spend the night on the road again, but everything was calm. By the end of the second day, I was pulling into Jack's yard. He did not meet me empty-handed either. I gave him everything I'd brought. The delivery of the shipment was not my concern. It was handled by specially trained men. When I told Jack about my adventures, he faltered his tongue for a long time, expressing either approval or condemnation of my frivolity. Then we drank some chaka, and I went to bed. After spending the night in Camille's arms, I went to the airport in the morning, accompanied by a friend. I didn't say goodbye myself. As they say, long farewells are tears. I had with me a few coins and a couple of funny souvenirs that I found in an abandoned caravanserai. We hugged in silence. I could see the mute question in Jack's eyes, and I knew how much I liked her. But I am a vagabond, a wanderer in life. So it's better to be without a family for now. I shook the hand held out to me firmly. I thought for a moment and took off my talisman, given by my grandfather, and gave it to Jack. Give it to Mina as a souvenir. My hometown met me with cold wind and nasty spring rain. A sharp contrast to the places I flew from. No one greeted me because I hadn't informed anyone I was coming. I picked up my car in the underground parking lot and took my time dragging home. In the 2 weeks I'd been gone, the snow had almost melted, leaving a pile of black mud along the sides of the highway, overnight freezing. And now the car almost slid on the ice, dispersing the water. The wipers rhythmically swept the raindrops, the light glass. I smoked, letting out the blue smoke through the open window. I felt dreary. Too many women had been around me lately. But for some reason, the memory of the last one resonated in my soul. Camille, yes, she was the one who had captured my heart. But alas, I'll never meet her again. Jack will probably marry her off to some respectable gentleman. I can only wish her happiness. An hour later, I was on the ring road, and a short time later, I was pulling up in front of my house. When I tried to open the front gate, the key didn't work. That's odd. I had recently changed the lock, and everything was perfect. I got out of the car and pressed the intercom button. I was tired on the road, and now I wanted to drink whiskey and sleep. "What do you want?" An unfamiliar male voice answered me. I was even a little taken aback. "I need to get into the house in some stupid way," I said. A minute later, the wicket was in the opening, stood some middle-aged man. "What do you want?" "The owners are still asleep. Get out of here." He tried to slam the wicket in my face, but my brain went into automatic mode, and I came to my senses when the guard flew aside, hitting his head on the brick fence. Yeah, you can't beat skill. I carefully stepped over the man's legs stretched across the path and headed for the front entrance. The glass door was unlocked. I made my way into the hallway and carefully set my bag down beside the couch. I wondered what the other owners were like. I hadn't rented or sold the house. Maybe Adriana and her monkeys had shown up again. I wasn't angry. I was just surprised. Went into the kitchen. Fridge is mine, but someone else's tea set is too bright. I don't like those. Opened the cupboard. The dishes were a mix of mine and someone else's, but only porcelain antique Latin, which looked so beautiful, was not behind the glass. I made coffee and went back to the hall. I should have waited for these owners to wake up. I must have dozed off, because I didn't hear the man enter the hall. "Who the hell are you?" A loud voice woke me up. Above me, an awning rolled in my eyes in surprise. A man in a green from class robe. Next to me stood an unfamiliar young woman and long fingers with blood-red nails frantically typing something on her iPhone. "Actually, I'm in my house," I said loudly. "Who are you?" "Who to?" "We bought this house and moved in 3 days ago. The owner and her child went to her husband up north and sold the house to us." The man was seething with righteous anger. "The owner is a young woman named Betty, and the girl's name is Christina, about 4 years old." I was beginning to realize what had happened. Betty had tears in her eyes at the airport. "Come back soon." And she tried to slip me a baby. That was a quick turnaround. It was so banal, it made me laugh. They say you shouldn't let strangers into your home. I imagine she got lost getting ready with the money. I, without getting into an argument, went into the study, pushed aside the painting hanging on the wall, opened the door of the secret safe, and took out the documents for the house. Here, read. "The house has one owner, and I'm not married. I'll give you 1 hour to get out of here. I'm getting tired of this, and put the dishes back where they belong. We bought this house. We're not going anywhere. You get out. If you have a problem with it, sue me. The guy was practically yelling, "Girl, call the police." Well, God knows, I did the best I could. I stood up and grabbed the man's nose with my right hand, didn't give him a second thought, threw him out the unlocked door into the street while splashing in the rain. Trying to get up, I walked over to my wife, shooed her away. Without ceremony, the woman nimbly jumped outside. She jumped up to her husband and tried to help him up. I didn't feel sorry for them. From the looks of it, the guys aren't poor somehow stomping around. While we were stomping around the house, a police car pulled up. Really, they got a pimply sergeant on me. The pimply sergeant even punched me in the stomach a couple times. Consolidating their success, the policemen cheerfully dragged me to the car, shouting something joyfully into the radio station. At the station, I showed my house papers to some important official in civilian clothes. He read the papers for a long time, moving his lips funny, then sighed. "This is a matter for the court to decide. You had no right to throw the present owners out of the house and to engage in violence." I didn't comment on his words and asked to make the phone call I was legally obliged to make. I quickly dialed the number on the other end of the wire, listened attentively, and was disconnected about half an hour later. The door to the office opened with a bang, hitting the wall. The boss sitting across from me jumped in surprise. The body of a man in a Kremlin suit floated into the office. He looked around the room and said, "Joseph." "Joe, I'm Mr. Smith's attorney." The man wagged his chin in my direction. "On what grounds is my client detained?" He tried to forcibly remove him. The warden started babbling, but the lawyer wouldn't let him finish. "My client is the legal owner of the house. It's documented." The lawyer's voice completely filled the office. "Mr. Smith does not have to prove what is already obvious. You are required to release my client immediately." But he beat the victim. The warden tried to interject. "The victim here is Mr. Smith. The men who tried to take possession of his house must leave immediately. And may Mr. Smith pray to God that Mr. Smith does not sue them for the theft of his property." The lawyer waved some paper like a flag. "You're to send a squad immediately and clear the house of invaders." Yeah, specialist, I thought. He should be at the UN. As I left the station, accompanied by my lawyer and a police captain, I saw a familiar pimply-faced sergeant standing by the car. "Just a minute, gentlemen, a little matter." I walked up to the sergeant and knocked him out with a straight punch to the jaw. As he fell, his head hit the side of the police car. His cap rolled off to the side. When I turned around, rubbing my bruised long arm, the lawyer and the captain were looking the other way. The music rolled in waves, almost knocking me off my feet. I sat at the bar and spit my third glass into myself. The bartender looked at me sympathetically. His eyes felt like they were screaming. I also nodded. Suddenly, the mirrored shelves reflected to the point of pain. A familiar face. I even sobered up. "Kathy, was it?" I turned around quickly. A lanky, foreign-looking man was standing next to her, hugging her by the waist. To be honest, I was a little confused. Kathy hadn't seen me, and I decided not to rush to her at once. Something told me I should wait. I turned to Bardeen. He nodded understandingly. He seemed to have seen my ruse. I slowly pulled up my whiskey, trying to follow the couple's maneuver with my eyes. As far as I could see, Kathy was dressed in an expensive outfit. Around her neck dangled a not-so-expensive gold necklace with pants. I'm an antique dealer, and I know what I'm looking at. Paying attention, apparently. My ex-lovers got it all together. Then why is her daughter Christina's baby not with her, but with Swindler and Betty? That's weird. If everything's fine, why doesn't Kathy take her? Or is it just not her baby? The con artist needed the girl to scam me, to make me feel sorry for her, so to speak. This is crazy. All these thoughts were heavy, collectively expressed in my alcohol-soaked head. I couldn't even decide whether to approach Kathy or not. What if she's with Betty? The music suddenly stopped, leaving my ears ringing. I looked at the glass display case of bottles. Kathy wasn't reflected there. which meant they were seated at a table. I cautiously turned around. Sure enough, there they were, sitting in the alcove near the table where Kathy and her boyfriend were sitting. The young woman leaned over and said something to her beau. He got up and walked toward the restrooms. I get it. It's now or never. Hello, my love, I spoke softly, but Kathy heard me perfectly well. You can sit down. Kathy stared at me for a while, stunned, then nodded nervously and looked around, searching for her companion with her eyes. How are you? How are you doing? In a calm voice, I asked. She obviously didn't know what to talk to me about. How's your daughter doing? Have you picked her up from her friend yet? Softly, I asked. What daughter? I don't have any children. Go away. My husband will be right back. Kathy looked around confused again. Who's Christina? I started shopping. Who's Christina? Leave me alone. Kathy blushed. My beloved has not greeted me kindly. And this is the man I've been dreaming of all these years. Although, on the other hand, I probably made up my own fairy tale of unearthly love. Kathy doesn't owe me anything. Suddenly, I was disgusted. I was about to get up when suddenly someone grabbed me from behind by the collar, and I could see Kathy's pupils dilate with fear. I was thrown off the chair and fell, hitting my head on the floor. While I was trying to figure out what was going on, I got a solid kick in the right side of my leg, even though I was drunk. But my reflexes worked, and I managed to regroup. A serious man at Kathy's, only jealous and bad jealous, wanted to kick me again, but I managed to grab him and yank him toward me. The man collapsed to the floor, pulling down the tablecloth and dishes at the same time. Now there were two of us on the floor, not so lonely anymore, but it was time to do the honors. I got up as quickly as I could and staggered to the exit, passing the bar. In the glass window, I saw a jealous woodpecker rushing after me. To be honest, I was getting pretty tired of fighting with him. I let him get closer. Then I took a step to the right, and with a U-turn punched him in the eye, jealously collapsed on his back, obediently headbutting the steps of the small staircase leading to the locker room. At that moment, the music roared and his pitiful squeak was drowned in maddening decibels. But why did I keep getting beaten up? I was feeling so myself. It was a shame that I even brushed away the tear-stained cheeks. I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself sympathetically in the mirror. No one to even feel sorry for me. On the cab ride home, I sobered up a little. And that's not good. I went to the kitchen, took a bottle out of the cabinet, and fell on my favorite couch with relief. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't alone in the house. Raising my head, saw in the semi-darkness of the hall, calmly sitting in a chair, a not young man. Asked in my temples how he had gotten here. It was the first thing that came to my mind. This place is like a back alley. It's not good to drink alone. Suddenly, the unexpected guest spoke. He took out a Chechen telescope from his coat pocket, a plastic cup, and with a sharp movement of his hand, put it on alert. I can bring a glass one. Uncertainly muttered I. No need. The man understood everything. I poured the whiskey, and we drank in silence. What's good in it? The guest frowned. Worse than our moonshine. We were silent for a while. Until the man got down to business. You had a very productive trip to Central Asia. The client was very pleased. He lit a thin cigarette without asking permission. But you will have to go back to those places again. I looked at the guest questioningly. There is a little business very well paid. The man let out a thin line of smoke from his mouth. Silver again? I asked gradually, coming to my senses. No, not silver. I know about your adventures in the Red Sands. The guest looked for an ashtray. The one where you encountered the elusive worm. Your story impressed a very rich man to such an extent that he got the idea to get the trophy. I almost choked, but I haven't seen it. That's just a guess. I was surprised beyond belief. So figure out what it was, mystical or real. The guest is standing up. The fee will be. He said such a sum that my eyes went black. When do I have to go? The thirst for profit threw away all doubts. For that kind of money, I was ready to walk to Central Asia. A man you know well will contact you. He will give you the necessary instructions, help you with equipment and necessary outfit. When will he contact me? Take your time. All in good time. The guest began to button his coat. Just a moment. I have a favor to ask of you. I'm up to. Yes, sir. The guest looked at me curiously. I told him about the recent events in my house and my assumptions about the people involved. The man listened to me and asked, "And what do you want?" "To take money from the crooks." "No, it's not my money. You can keep it as a fee." I looked my guest straight in the eye. "I'm interested in the child. Who is he, and where is he now? It's ungodly to give a girl hope and then give it back." "All right, I understand you." The guest didn't let me finish. "What to do with the crooks?" "At your discretion," I said. The man turned and disappeared behind the front door. As of recently, I have a vintage radio waves in my office, a Minsk 61, made back in the 1950s. I took the receiver away from my mom when she persistently started complaining about the glut of old junk. There's a beautiful lamp in Rodion in working order. It had been bought by my grandfather, so it came to me as a sort of inheritance. It now stood on the vintage pedestals to the left of the table and delighted the eye with its perfect forms. Yes, people knew how to make good things in their time. Time flies fast. Already the radios of the 60s are becoming antiques. What's up with receivers, equipment from the 70s and 80s? Now, in the antique trend, I am very often approached by fans of tape recorders of the late 80s of the last century. Ask already, and seeing the equipment of the early 90s, VCRs, analog camcorders, tape recorders. Even 30 years ago, we used this equipment, believing that it could not be better. And now it's gone vintage. Turntables are probably next. Apparently, every generation sooner or later starts to feel nostalgic for a bygone time, and maybe even without realizing it, looking for things that can at least for a while bring them back to their past. To be honest, vintage radio equipment is not my profile. But more and more often, I started to think about opening a special department in my store dedicated to this topic. For some reason, it seems to me that this direction of antique business is very promising. I cozily settled in an armchair, pulled out of the bowels of the table, typing a bottle of Jamieson and Nakatala, a 2-finger glass of the amber beverage. What to do? There was no question. If there is a Rodiona, one should listen to her. I looked out the window. It was snowing, which is not quite typical for April. Large snowflakes were beating against the window like frozen butterflies, trying to make their way to the hot cabinet. I felt cold, and I stood up and closed the window. A toggle switch clicked. The settings dial lit up cheerfully. I remembered how in my distant childhood, including Rodiona, I had felt inexpressible excitement. One inscriptions on the school at the construction site were worth what? Tirana, Prague, Moscow, Ljubljana, Berlin. The names of unfamiliar cities sounded to me like a pass to an unknown world, and the announcers, broadcasting in unfamiliar languages, seemed to me good wizards, counting their spells. I pressed the DV key for about 30 years now. Almost no one broadcasts on the long and medium waves. Once the bands were bursting with the number of stations. Today they are silent with occasional crackles and sounds that are not dickish. Finally, the melody of a sentimental French Schlager of the 60s poured out of the speaker. It was a wonderful time for girls with natural breasts, rubber band stockings, short skirts, spyglasses barely covering and panties. I even clutched at the nostalgic memories, clearly picturing a time I knew only from old magazines and movies. The French chanteuse was replaced by an upbeat Chuck Berry hit. Women are bloodthirsty cats, but it's boring without them. Chuck assured me. Yeah, boring as hell. I thought about it and decided to take a closer look at the things I'd brought back from my last trip. I took 2 packages out of the desk drawer and laid them out neatly in front of me. One of them contained an antique dagger with a handle covered in silver and worn from time. When I pulled it out of its sheath, the weapon fell into my hand as if it had flown in. It seemed as if it had been made especially for me. In the other surtout was a small figure of a cat-like beast made of unknown material. It was probably carved from stone and covered with bronze paint. Its muzzle with an open mouth looked very spectacular. In the eyes of the predator were skillfully inserted black amethysts, a very rare variety of this semi-precious stone. The finest carvings, hundreds of tiny touches, all of which made the sculpture of the beast almost lifelike. Half-bent, back paws, pinned ears curved like a spring spine. It seemed as if the predator was about to deliver a swift death blow to the head of the raptor. A blood-red ruby was inserted, which seemed to set off the beastly nature of the figure. I wish I knew how this masterpiece ended up in a dilapidated caravan shed. I set the figurine on the stone shelf and put the dagger in the table. Maybe someday I'll hang an antique handmade rug in my study and place an antique weapon on it. As I drifted off to sleep, it seemed to me that the beast on the mantelpiece was ravenously removing the treasure with its teeth. The next morning I received a text message with the address. I scribbled it into my notebook, knowing the message would be gone in a minute. I took a long smoke, settling my gaze into the wall. Well, nothing teaches me anything. My life is always getting in the wrong way and always ends, as usual, with black ingratitude and hatred. And I'm going to hang on to a burden that I'll have to carry for the rest of my life. And on the other hand, there's no other hand. What's that girl to me? Who is she to me? You can't save and warm everyone. So that's her fate, and there's nothing I can do about it. Besides, where am I supposed to put her? I live alone, and I don't have any babysitters. I'm relieved. I finally made the right decision. In my life, I've learned one thing very clearly. Most women, regardless of age, are monstrously ungrateful. My car was traveling down a dirt road, periodically dived into shallow puddles, breaking the wheels, thin ice. It had been freezing since the night before, but it was already clear that spring has won the tedious winter. In an hour, the sun would warm up, and the ice would melt, and the road would turn into impassable swamps. Soon a one-storied barrack, with the walls eared from time and rain, appeared from the turn. I pushed open the shaky doors and stepped into the dark hallway. It looked like the structure was uninhabited, but judging by the voices carrying all from one of the rooms, there were people here. I approached the lantern door, leading into one of the rooms, and without removing my gloves, I turned the knob. The odor of rot and cigarette smoke hit my nostrils. Across from the entrance, a table was piled with smoke, leftovers, and empty bottles. Dropped his head on his folded hands, sat half-undressed woman, two men homeless. They were arguing loudly about something. When I opened the door, all these picturesque characters stared at me in amazement. Even the woman with difficulty, but raised her head. "What do you want?" Coughing, one of the men in a dirty dress dressed on a naked body. "Where is the girl?" Trying not to breathe the unbearable stench, I asked loudly, "Was Christina here yesterday?" The uncle seemed to have a bad hangover. He pushed the woman. "Hey, what's up? Where's the girl? What do you need her for?" Missed the woman, looking at me, swollen with lice from drunken eyes. I ignored her question. On the iron bed against the opposite wall, did someone stir? One of the men nodded at the pile of filthy crap. Here she crawled out from under the rags. She didn't even have the strength to cry. Probably those bastards hadn't fed her lately. I gently lifted the girl up, and she, like a kitten, trustingly nuzzled her nose into my coat. "Leave it." The woman tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't hold her, and she fell back on the stool. "I'm taking the girl." I honestly didn't care who Christina was. "What do you mean?" "I'm taking her." The first man reacted. "We fed her, clothed her, raised her, for nothing." I threw some bills on the table. "That's enough." It was visible how all the members of the collective's eyes flashed greedily, dressing the child in a coat. I went out to the car, put the girl in the back seat. Asked, "Do you remember me?" She nodded. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was the strangest ad Alvin had come across in a month of searching. Need a grandfather for a boy, payment negotiable, and a phone number. The people had gone crazy. The rich people had gone crazy. Alvin resented the computer's mouse over the page. Not only do they have personal nannies, drivers, cooks, housekeepers, now they hire grandfathers. And they find them if they write so confidently about their need. The old man had been looking for a job for several months already. He was completely impoverished with this pension. He himself had lived modestly all his life. This paltry pension would have sufficed for one man, but thunder. The old man thought not so much about his own welfare as about the health of his faithful friend. The old dog, like Alvin himself, has long been in need of good medical support. The cost of a veterinarian's services was scary to think about. Besides, there were no good veterinary clinics in their remote area. Helen's daughter Helen, a veterinarian, was a great professional, but the consumables, as they now called all medical drugs and dressings, had to be bought for separate money. To take a huge old dog to the city, you need a cab, and not every cab driver will take an animal in the cabin. In short, old people, especially of the dog breed, had a hard time if they got sick. Animal feed has not only become more expensive in recent years, but has reached unthinkable sums. It seemed cheaper to raise a whole bull than to feed a dog or a cat. And Thunder, a dog of impressive size and eats several times more than the owner, but one Spunger, Alvin did not do without. He also fed dogs abandoned by dacha owners because he felt very sorry for them. Betrayed by their summer masters, with the onset of cold weather, these unfortunate animals slowly died, not realizing the proximity of winter. The first to fall ill were the kittens who had not had time to grow up before the frosts. At the same time, their mother cats disappeared somewhere, perhaps surviving as best they could. Squinting their blind, dirty eyes, these abandoned ones crawled out into the weak September sunshine and gained warmth in their fur, but only for a short while. Cold, damp weather would come, and the kittens would disappear somewhere one by one. Adult cats were more viable after all. Nature had endowed them with hunting habits, but even they could not survive the harsh winters. Dogs fared even worse. Loyal to man, they were accustomed to take ready food from the hands of their masters. It was simply impossible for them to get food in the abandoned village in the fall. The villagers did not keep chickens. They did not leave food for their meanly forgotten pets. So Alvin supported them as much as his small pension allowed. He lived in his old dacha. The city apartment was completely ceded to his daughter Helen, who could not arrange her personal life. The old man did not complain. He even liked living at the dacha. No fuss, forest, near the river and clean air, not like in the city. The main thing for an elderly person is peace and quiet. Adult loneliness is not stressful at all. If there are no health problems, it is in youth the soul tears to friends, in a noisy company, to fun and dancing. Every hour, even every minute of communication. Personality absorbs the surrounding world, as if pulling out of it through the environment, the most necessary and important for themselves, and an adult, established man, so much noise is not needed. On the contrary, he has so many thoughts and images in his head, so many things to think about, and yet it would be difficult for a pensioner, in this dacha area almost alone, if not for the joys of civilization. In the village there was electricity, excellent mobile communication, and most importantly, the internet. On any occasion, Alvin went to search engines, read a lot, studied everything that interested him and what he had not been able to do before. He always had a need and could not sit idle for a day. Now that he had finally retired, he was thinking of ways to strengthen his economy, as he called the simple economy, and all the money matters. During the summer months, all the old man's money reserves were exhausted, and he decided to find a feasible job. Don't hesitate, his neighbor told him cheerfully. Jacob, a fat dacha owner, was gnawing furiously with his strong teeth on an apple that had just been plucked from a nearby tree. There's someone to guard the dachas here in winter anyway. Go on, here's a great job for you. Pensioner thought to go and guard, but not so. If before old men worked in these positions, now the easy job was taken by young and strong guys from all kinds of security firms. In the evening, tired from the day's running around the village in search of the bosses, Alvin sat on the porch. The dog, who was nestled near his feet, put his head on his lap. Did Thunder see what was going on? What is so important that they are guarding there, that such strong young men are assigned to the objects? The old man asked, stroking the dog's big head. After all, you have to work on such guys, and they sit there, doing nothing but playing on the phones. He sighed heavily and with a nod, saying goodbye to his friend, who was used to communicating with the dog as with a man. The old man went into the house to think about the next day. In the morning, Alvin again sat down at the old computer and found a couple of phone numbers of organizations, as they say, in walking distance. The first was the construction of high-rise buildings. The new complex was being built just between the city and the village, where Alvin lived for the time being. All that remained was to get the coveted job and to it a salary. Hello. I'm calling you from an ad. I'd like to apply for a job as a security guard. Hello, what have you been doing so far? Why do you want to be a security guard? How old are you? The questions came one after another. Apparently, there were a lot of calls, and a set of questions was prepared for any candidate and memorized by the questioner to death so as not to think too long. I worked at the factory, retired. A woman's voice in the receiver didn't let him finish. No, sorry, we don't take pensioners. They hung up on him. Alvin decided not to get upset and dialed the next number. Hello, is this the store? Do you need a security guard? Yes, I do, but did you serve in the army? The male bass on the other end of the line asked him. Grandpa's phone was a cell phone, but he was so used to thinking that on the other end of the line, Alvin even smiled. Oh, honey, when I was in the service, you probably weren't even alive yet. How old are you? His voice became suspicious. 62. Alvin was getting a little sad. He was starting to realize what was going on. I'm sorry, we're in material security. We need young guys who can use weapons and catch up with criminals. I don't think you'd be a good fit. Wow, they catch criminals. Alvin said to himself, carefully hanging up the phone. No customers in the store, just criminals. This guy must have gone straight from the police to the easy bread, or else. He shook his gray head and dialed the next number, the gym, which was not so close, almost on the outskirts of town, 3 kilometers away. Alvin would have agreed to walk there every day, despite his sore legs, just to earn money. Hello, are you looking for a security guard? He started talking. No, we've already found one. A young man's voice answered him cheerfully. Our former coach just got a job. Excuse me, Father. Good luck to you. There were no more suitable jobs on the old people's website, and Alvin had to go back to the strange ad for a grandfather for a boy. It is strange, everywhere refuse, only after hearing about his age, and here even by the voice instantly determined the old people, and here it is written in black and white that it is required exactly grandfather. I decided to call. What the hell is not kidding? I should at least find out what is the meaning of the grandfather's duties. The old man coughed well, so that his voice did not seem so old and creaky, and dialed the number specified in the ad. A pleasant female voice answered, speaking. "Hello, I'm calling from the ad. My name is Alvin." The invisible interlocutor seemed to be very lively. "Hello. Thank you for calling. My name is Clara. You probably thought my announcement was a little strange." Alvin just coughed embarrassedly into the phone, but I can't argue with that. "Alvin, I'd like to talk to you in person, if you don't mind. Where do you live? Is there any chance you could come down here?" "You'd better come to my place," said Alvin. "I live here." He explained in detail how to get to his village and cottage. He pressed the phone and quickly put things in order. Everything was always fine on his plot of land, but inside the cottage, of course, lacked a woman's hand. I changed the tablecloth on the table, cleaned up some abandoned things not subject to prying eyes, even took a towel and wiped off some dust. Then he washed, shaved, put on his new tracksuit, and waited for Clara. Exactly at the agreed time, at 6 p.m., a black Jeep drove up to Alvin's house. A tall man of strong build got out of it. He looked more like a bodyguard than a driver. Opening the door, the driver helped a petite, dark-haired woman out of the Jeep, wearing an elegant pantsuit suitable for the office, but not for a trip to a pensioner's hovel. Nevertheless, the lady walked confidently toward the cottage along the tamped path, already strewn with yellow leaves. Alvin approached the guests with a smile. "Good day to you. Come inside, dear guests." "Hello again," said Clara in an unexpectedly low voice and held out a small, strong hand. The driver nodded briefly and introduced himself. "I am also Alvin." His shake was stiff and as short as the greeting. The host led the guests into the house and offered tea and jam. "Tea makes conversation more pleasant," he explained. "I would love to drink tea, especially with homemade jam." Picked up Clara. "And let's drink tea in your garden. I saw a table with benches there." "Oh, great!" Alvin was pleased. He did not want to show the interior of his cottage, which was not very suitable for such a gorgeous guest. The weather was just fine for early September. The sun was warm, the evening was wonderfully warm and quiet, though in the morning the leaves of the big birches growing in the distance seemed to be falling. Alvin had been drinking strong and fresh tea all his life, adding to it all sorts of herbs, which he had collected over the summer and dried a myriad of them. "Today we have mint tea," he commented, pouring the tea into cups. "I also made my own jam from that cherry tree over there. The berries, see? There are still some left on the top. We should leave cherries for the birds, too." The host also opened a box with beautiful cookies, thoughtfully brought by the guests. The pensioner had never tasted anything like them. The guests seemed to enjoy the view and the fragrant tea, and she gave the jam its due. She looked around the garden with marked pleasure and sighed at the pure air. Alvin, the driver, took his glass of tea and moved closer to Thunder, who had been warned by his host that the guests were his own and should be treated with courtesy. The dog wagged his tail, and the guest turned out to be an expert in canine psychology. The two were also having a good time. Between the old man and the young woman, a warm conversation ensued. "I'm Alvin. I came to you specially to have a look at you at home. At home a man is really open, and you are a hospitable man. It immediately disposes to you. At first glance, everything about you suits me. You do not drink, tidy look in the house, and in the garden you have order, and therefore in the head order. Tell me a little about yourself." "Oh, Clara, my life can't be told in 2 words. I've already lived a long time." The owner of the house smiled sadly. "And you are not in a hurry. I am free from all business for today. The whole evening is free, and you will have a rest from business." My life flowed like all men of my generation, in general. Started Alvin. Finished school, straight into the Army. What's it like here? It was considered a disgrace if a guy didn't go to the Army, and the service was not like today. A real soldier's service, officers, fathers in fact, then long corresponded with cowworkers, and who continued to be friends all their lives. When I came back, I got a job at the plant and worked as a milling machine operator for 43 years. The work requires neatness, accuracy. I liked it very much. I liked the work very much. And your family? The guest asked. Yes, I met my Kathy at the factory. She was still a snotty girl when I went to the Army. She was running around in the neighborhood. I didn't even notice her. But when I arrived, I saw her at the gatehouse. I didn't even recognize her. She was so beautiful, and what a golden character she had, except that I was a little jealous when I was young. Alvin laughed embarrassedly. What to say now? It was so long ago. We got married and lived together. Alvin did not like to lie and never deceived anyone, but there was a secret in his life that he had to carry with him. The only person privy to it was his wife, his favorite Kathy. In fact, she was the owner of this very secret. She was also the cause of her husband's secrecy, the only one in question. Alvin, then a young demobilized man, actually met Kathy at the factory gate. They stood in line to mark their passes during the largest gathering of workers before their shift. Alvin hardly recognized in the beautiful girl, with wavy blonde hair and blue eyes, his little neighbor who ran with a briefcase to school. He noticed and remembered her, and in the following days he habitually picked out her pretty figure from the crowd. He himself did not notice how he began to wait for her involuntarily, at first just to see her. Then he began to greet the girl with a nod of the head and a smile. Furthermore, the first lines of greeting began, conversations like, "We are on the way, neighbor." The young people reached out to each other, unexpectedly. That's how it always happens when the heart is waiting for love. Only Kathy could not raise her eyes and look at Alvin directly. She always looked away sadly, although it was obvious that she was also waiting for unplanned meetings on the way to and from work. Alvin started dropping by Kathy's house to ask her to a movie or a dance. The girl shyly refused, but her mother, seeing Alvin as a son of good parents, sent her daughter to take a walk with him. Go on, there's no need to spend your youth sitting by the window. They went to the movies, went to dances, ran to a distant forest for berries, later for mushrooms. Only Kathy was sad more and more every day. One day Alvin talked about the future. "Kathy, that's when we'll be married." He started. Suddenly Kathy sobbed, so desperately and violently that Alvin was confused. "What is this?" He put his arms around her. "What's the matter with you?" "I didn't hurt you, did I?" Kathy wrenched herself out of his arms, crying furiously, wiping her red, swollen face with her fists, and was utterly inconsolable. He sat her down on the trunk of a fallen tree, gave her some tea from a small thermos, and kept silent, barely calmed down. Blowing her nose loudly into Alvin's same handkerchief, Kathy muttered muffledly as if to herself, "If we don't get married, we'll have nothing, Alvin. I'm spoiled." Alvin froze for a moment, not understanding what she said, and then he grabbed her in his arms and spoke. "What's this nonsense, Kathy? But where did you find such a word? You're the nicest one I've got." Hugged her tightly and didn't let her go until she started crying again. Only then, with a second burst of tears, did she manage to tell of her trouble, which had been burning her all these 3 summer months while she had been conversing with the young man. By some terrible irony of fate, this misfortune happened to the girl right on the eve of Alvin's return from the Army. Saturday afternoon. The young people from their shop had gathered for the birthday party of one of the girls, Lena. Kathy didn't know all the guys very well, but they had been in close contact with Lena for a long time, and with the permission of her parents, also went to a small dacha, where Lena organized her party. At first it was fun. They played, sang, danced. Then a few couples scattered around the plot and nearby bushes went for a walk. Kathy, who was taking part in such an adult party for the first time, felt very tired. She went up to the attic of the cottage and, taking off her sandals, lay down to rest on the sofa. She had visited Lena before and felt confident. The girl did not notice how she fell asleep under the muffled conversations and shouts of the guests. Suddenly waking up, hers was eerie. Something heavy was lying on top of her. She couldn't even move or breathe. As she tried to crawl out from under the weight, Kathy felt rough hands covering her mouth and the stench of vodka booze. Thomas? She was horrified to recognize the new mechanic who had recently joined their shop and had been stalking her with savage persistence since her first days at the plant. It was rumored that he had a very murky past. Often the same odor of booze followed him on Mondays when he stood in the gatehouse. Kathy huddled under his long, heavy body in terror, but there was nothing she could do. She was just a silly little mouse caught in the claws of a predator. Gasping, the girl tried to at least bite the dirty palm that covered her mouth, but to no avail. Nearly fainting from lack of air, she twisted and twisted, but it was too late. She realized there was no escaping her rapist. Then a stunned Thomas was heard. "What are you? What are you, a girl? What a surprise. Just keep your mouth shut, okay? No one will know." Kathy cleaned herself up almost indifferently and turned her back to the wall. She spent the night in stupor, silently pretending to be asleep. In the morning, without giving the appearance of feeling unwell, she went home with everyone else. Noting that Thomas and his buddy Jacob were gone, run off or drunk somewhere, God help them. She wasn't interested in anything. Kathy was out of reality. Only her shell retained the ability to smile, talk, and pretend to be alive. To her mother, who started asking about the birthday party, she said, "Yes, Mother, it was very good." Kathy scrubbed herself in the bathtub with a stiff washcloth, but she could not consider herself clean enough. She could feel Thomas's dirty fingers on her white skin, on her belly, between her legs. The nights passed in agony, and later the girl realized that this was not all. She found herself pregnant by a man she hated. Now she had to hide from people, first of all, from her parents, morning sickness, bizarre choice of food. She couldn't eat her former favorite cheese, cottage cheese and sour cream. The last few weeks had gotten bad with clothes, her belly growing and not interfering with her maiden dress and skirts. Kathy had been drawn to Alvin from the first time she met him, as if he was the only reliable support during those dreadful weeks and months. So terribly mixed up in her life, the misery of her rapist and the happiness of renewed acquaintance with her former mere neighbor, Alvin, that her head was spinning. To master the situation, to decide to make some changes, young Kathy was in no way able. Alvin listened to the whole story with a coolness that surprised the girl. Then he asked, Thomas, where is he?" "I don't know. He ran away somewhere. They say he goes away and comes back a lot." "Well, let's go to yours and decide about the wedding," just said Alvin. "Mine are always on my side. A child is happiness." About this Alvin could not tell not only to today's guest, but also to anyone in the world, including his favorite daughter Helen, and he continued his story. There was no time to relax. Soon Helen's daughter was born. While they were raising their daughter, building a dacha, and planting a garden, they did not notice how time was running away. In time, we got an apartment from the factory. Since both spouses have been working for a long time, they gave us a comfortable, good apartment in the city, right in the center. We lived frugally, of course, but we were not poor, but still, we took our daughter to the sea a couple of times. Everything like people. Why don't you live in a city apartment? Clara asked. It would be more convenient for an elderly person in the city, and friends and relatives probably remained, and also the clinic nearby if suddenly there are problems. As I buried my wife a couple of years ago, I felt bad, Slaga. Lowering his head, the old man answered, everything reminded me of her. All our friendly years were remembered. I felt sad, and my daughter had grown up. She had no luck with family matters. Her husband turned out to be unreliable, a drunkard. She left him before it was too late. She decided it was better to be alone than to waste her life with a drunkard. So I decided to leave her there, in her home apartment, and I moved here. It's nice here. Spreading his arms, Alvin sighed widely and freely. I'll always find something to do here. There are plenty of neighbors in the summer. Every now and then they call me to help with something. In general, I'm a man in demand in the summer. I can help someone with a car, someone with a fence or a shed. Fix it, nail it. Men's hands are always needed in the village, and there is enough work in my garden. In the vegetable garden, I grow all my own. In winter, though, it's a bit boring, and I want to work. I've got Thunder. He needs good treatment and food. Doesn't your daughter come to see you? Why, yes, she does. Alvin wanted to take offense. She comes, cleans up, does the laundry. What else can she do? Sometimes she takes away the gifts of her native land, as they say, but she's always busy. She works as a veterinarian. She has a love for animals since childhood, from me, apparently. My daughter and I have always, then a sparrow, fallen nursed, then kittens picked up and put. That's why she decided to study to become a veterinarian, to help our lesser brothers. And my Grom, he is also one of those dogs that are abandoned by their owners when they go abroad. And this happens? Surprised guest. How could it be? There is no worse traitor than a man who tamed an animal and abandoned it. Alvin replied angrily, You should see how many abandoned cats and dogs are left in our village when their owners go to the city. They have a friend, a temporary vacation, you know? And then they go to the city, don't care about yesterday's friends, and animals in an empty village without people's help. How are they supposed to survive? Alvin was not on the point of getting nervous, having touched on his sore subject. That's what I wanted to do. I've got a lot of them here, loyal friends, all hungry. Oh, is that what this is about? Clara gasped. Yes, my Helen saw Thunder and couldn't resist. One day, very wealthy people came to her clinic and asked her to put the dog to sleep. A healthy, beautiful German shepherd. How could they just kill him like that? Helen Mine was just numb with indignation and horror. The owner of the dog didn't want to hear anything. People like him, you see, only hear themselves. All the more that tickets abroad for Grom's owners had already been bought, and they were not going to cancel the trip. Helen Auer only waved her hand, did not even look at the bill thrown by the owner. How can you evaluate life and death? The owner left without saying goodbye. Well, Helen left Grom, hoping to attach to good people, but no one wanted to take an 8-year-old dog, even for free. Helen Mai, as she saw Grom, so and attached, but to take to himself in the city apartment, of course, could not, wanted later still to find for him the owners. Daddy asked me to take him for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. How can I help my daughter? I look at the dog, and his eyes are so sad, as if asking, Why did they do this to me? Are you like that too? Believe me, Clara, I felt so ashamed in front of him. Not for me, of course, but for his heartless owners. I realized he was my dog. I immediately fell in love with him. And here we are, 2 old men. What a wonderful daughter you have, Alvin, said the touched guest. It's right, you brought her up. My pension is small and thunder, and I don't have enough, so I decided to look for a job. Now I have a question for you, Clara. Why do you need a grandfather? I think, with your financial situation, you could hire nannies, teachers, or whatever they are, governesses for the boy? The woman smiled, an open, clear smile. Well, my Adam hasn't needed babysitters for a long time. He's 9 years old. But we have a problem with Alvin. My Adam is disabled. He's in a wheelchair. My son was born a normal child. Everything was fine, but only just. I'll start at the beginning. Tell me about it. Alvin prepared to listen. I'll start with the frank. Adam was born without a father. Because of my serious work and busy schedule, nothing worked out with men. Some people see that I have a character, you must admit, strong-willed. They were afraid they'd live their whole life under my thumb. A strong woman, you see, doomed to loneliness. Others, there is such a type, drooled over my property, dreaming how they will live for many years without poverty. So many years have passed in labor. It would seem everything is prosperous in my business, but happiness in my personal life as was not. And no, I couldn't find a man to marry, so I decided to have a child for myself. Well, that's your right, Alvin said. Things happen in life. The main thing is that you have a son. Of course, the woman said hotly. I was happy, Father Adam. He does not even suspect the existence of a son. I made up my mind. The fact is that he is a family man, quite established, a successful businessman. I met him through my work. We had common projects. I don't feel comfortable telling you too much of my personal life. Maybe you don't need it at all. But today I want to be frank. Do you understand, Alvin? Of course I understand. That's what Alvin said. Please tell me everything. Don't be shy. Sometimes it's important to tell someone. Yes, it is. I'm used to dealing with things on my own. My mom wasn't much help with that sort of thing. Maybe she wouldn't even accept my decision to have a child out of wedlock. But this man, it seemed to me that he would be a good fit for my life. He was so reliable, independent, and strong, but by that time, he had a wonderful family, growing children, already school children. I didn't want to cause these beautiful people any grief, you know? Why should I destroy his already established family happiness? And I decided not to say anything to him. I would manage alone, so that there would not be any problems that would interfere with the normal life of my son and me. I gave birth so easily, I was as happy as possible. Everything was good. My business was booming. My mom and nanny were helping raise the baby. So the boy was born and grew up healthy? Her interlocutor asked a question. Yes, everything was going fine. When Adam finished the first grade, I bought a trip to the islands for mom and son to have a rest. That's where the trouble happened. My grandmother died in front of my son. Suddenly, not even expected illness, a heart attack. Adam was shocked, stressed, and on this ground his legs failed. Doctors do not find any pathology. We have not consulted with any medical luminaries. We did not hear anything definite. They all refer to the stress of the child. What only doctors and healers I did not take my son, no one gives no prognosis, only divorced hands. The reason, apparently, is purely psychological. Whether Adam will go again or not is unknown. Some neurologists say that perhaps with some more stress, he could suddenly stand on his own 2 feet. There needs to be some kind of push that can help the boy, but no one guarantees a positive outcome. And what if the next stress, on the contrary, aggravates Adam's condition? No one would take a risk in such a case, supported Alvin. That's why my son and I have to be prepared for any eventuality. Adam needs a lot of strength to become a real man, to feel like a full man. I want my child to have a future, to be able to continue my business and build a happy life for himself. But there seems to be a perfect example in front of him, his mother. The old man spoke up. "Ah, my dear Alvin, that's when I realized the meaning of the word fatherless. When I was young, I didn't realize how the absence of a father would affect my son. It's still a discreet but purely female environment, you know. The child grows up petted, sees the world from a woman's point of view. Adam needs a man around him with experience, not today's young men who often grow up under mom's skirt and then cannot get rid of this skirt. Mama's sons, such are not able to be responsible for the family, and what a family, they cannot answer for themselves and even provide for themselves. My son, he was born, apparently, so nervous and taking everything to heart. It is especially important for him to be strong, plus he has a delicate soul. We need someone like you. After all, our Adam has never had the confidence of a grown man, and he needs it. So, do you agree?" "I agree." Without hesitation, Alvin answered. During the time they were talking, Clara opened up to the old man completely, and he could not help but feel her pain for her only son. He was even more struck by the woman's frankness, her complete defenselessness in front of a man she had met for the first time, her invaluable trust. Just like my ward animals, it seemed inappropriate to compare Alvin. How could one fail to justify such trust? The businesswoman immediately began to plan for future cooperation. She instantly picked herself up, opened a small notebook, which she took out of her purse. "In the morning, Adam has a school program, and by 2 o'clock he will be waiting for you. A driver will come to pick you up and take you home at 8 p.m. Would that be okay with you?" "Yes, of course, that would be fine." Alvin nodded his head. Then they discussed the payment. The sum named by Clara was much more than the old man had expected. Alvin was discouraged and even shocked. Slava stood up from the table and again became a real business lady, strict, even haughty and unapproachable. Outwardly it was manifested in a slightly stronger compressed lips, proudly raised head, even her height became as if higher. After saying goodbye, the woman left. Alvin was so tense that he was preparing in advance for the upcoming sleepless night. He was very tired from the long conversation. It had been a long time since he had had to empathize with such deep feelings of another person, and he couldn't believe that he would get such money for working as a grandfather. "Well, Thunder, let's get on with it." He patted his pet's head. "We'll find out tomorrow. Old people often worry about all sorts of things. They tend to sleep badly both after good news and bad news." Alvin was no exception to the rule, and after seeing his new acquaintance off, he couldn't sleep for a long time, tossing and turning in his not wide bed and imagining tomorrow morning what it would bring him, how he would cope with his new position as a grandfather. It's easy to say, but in fact, the task is very, very difficult. Will he be able to find a common language with the boy? Will Adam like to communicate with a strange old man? That's the challenge. Alvin did not think that in his old age he would want to like someone. Grinning at the unexpected thoughts, the old man turned on his left side and finally fell asleep. He woke up early, as was his habit, with a feeling of lightness and some good feeling in his soul. Then he remembered, "I'm going to work today. I'm going to meet a nice guy." He quickly prepared a simple breakfast, fed Thunder, and cleared the table. He was on time. At the appointed time, a car came to pick up Alvin. Alvin's driver honked the horn and looked out the window and waved to Alvin. "Good morning, Alvin." "Ready?" "Yes, Alvin. I'm on my way." The old man replied, and turning toward the dog kennel, he ordered, "Thunder, you're in charge. Keep order. I'll only be 8, don't miss me." He locked the flimsy cabin door for good measure, put the key in the usual place he and Helen knew about, and ran off the porch. A black Jeep drove them to Slag's house in a matter of minutes. Already at the entrance it became clear that the neighborhood was very prestigious. A high fence limited the part of the building. They had to pass through a closed gate with a barrier, at which stood a guard. In a booth at the gate was a telephone set. "That's what I got," mumbled to himself Alvin, and said aloud, "It's like a closed town here." "Yes," answered Alvin with his usual laziness. "We've got celebrities living here. They're afraid for their lives, you see." Alvin felt a little uncomfortable, to say the least. He did not like to enter an unfamiliar space on a bird's license. The farther they drove into the buildings, the higher the houses were, the more imposing the fences, and now it was not houses, but whole castles rising among the trees. Alvin had never seen such wealth before, except in the movies, and he felt a little shy. The house in which he was to work was also large and beautiful. Alvin led him up the front stairs to the door and held out his hand, inviting him in. "Mary, we're here." He shouted loudly into the back of the house and immediately turned and walked away to his car. Alvin was a little afraid to tread on the shiny parquet floor and probably looked confused, but help came in the form of a ruddy, full-figured woman in a white apron who appeared out of nowhere. "Hello. My name is Mary. I'm the housekeeper. And you are, as I understand, Alvin." She smiled and extended a big warm hand to introduce herself. "Yes," the old man said quietly, looking around at the ceiling mirrors and the chic decorations of the lobby. "Don't be shy, Alvin." Mary smiled even wider. "We are expensive and rich here, but we have simple relations. Everything is human. You'll get used to it in no time, you'll see." Mary went to the big open door to the rooms and called loudly, "Adam, Alvin is here to see you." From the back of the room, an exclamation sounded. Then there was a soft squeak of wheels, and a light wheelchair rolled into the lobby, in which sat a thin, dark-haired boy, easily recognizable as Slag's son, the same warm look in his brown eyes, the same smile. But only a person lucky enough to see the boy's mother in such openness as Alvin had during yesterday's conversation could see the resemblance. The boy approached his guest and smilingly extended his hand. "Hello, Alvin. I'm Adam." The old man shook the boy's skinny hand and said, "Well, hello, Adam. You can call me Alvin, or you can just call me Uncle Alvin." "Well, come on. I'll show you my room," said Adam and rolled forward, at the same time telling about his home. The boy was obviously happy to meet the new acquaintance and wanted to present his favorite corners as much as possible. Alvin looked at Adam with attention and as if he saw himself as a child. He had no experience with boys, no sons or grandchildren yet, but looking into the child's lively face, he vividly recalled his childhood years. What was he curious about? What could he interest the little acquaintance in? And Adam did not seem to be thinking at all. He was showing the guest his household with joy. On the contrary, he showed Alvin his new computer. "Do you use the computer?" asked the boy. "I have to, but I have a very old one." The man answered. Alvin watched with interest as the boy quickly tapped the keys and typed the necessary words in the search engine. The first word was router. Adam wanted to show his grandfather the possibilities of Wi-Fi. Come on, Adam." Alvin rushed to him. "Explain to me again. How can I connect to it?" His daughter gave him a good smartphone for his birthday, and now Alvin was, as they say, armed with the latest knowledge through the internet. But he didn't have Wi-Fi in his cabin, and he was happy to learn from Adam about its possibilities. The men had a lot to discuss before Mary called them to the table. They talked as equals. Alvin had no time to marvel at how much Adam knew. They went to the kitchen, where the table was set for two. "You're welcome," Mary said in a friendly voice. It was obvious that she was glad to have a new face in the house. "Inviting the guest, Adam." "Mary always feeds me an afternoon snack," Adam said. "We have dinner with Mom. That's later in the evening. Mom is always at work. Sometimes she comes late, and I wait for her. That's when Mary scolds us. How can you not? You'll get sick to your stomachs living like this." Mary grumbled good-naturedly. "The child is hungry. He's bored to eat dinner alone, and Clara is burning with work, forgetting everything. How can you do that? Yes, war is war, but dinner is on time, as they say." Caught up with Alvin. "Adam, you should grow up. Eat properly. All your strength goes into growth. At your age, now's the time to build muscle." "Yes." Adam was surprised. "And how to build them? Is it to be like wrestlers or heavy athletes?" "And that, my dear fellow, is to eat more meat and vegetables," answered Alvin. "And exercise, strengthen arms, legs, food should be well mastered." Then he realized that he had talked about arms and legs for nothing. But looking at the child's interested face, he continued, "Here is my daughter treats animals. She is my doctor, only veterinary. She has cats and dogs and even birds in patients can be. So she prescribes them just such a diet to recover faster, meat and vegetables." He continued to pour out details from Helen's practice, seeing the interested look of the small interlocutor. Adam looked at him with all his eyes, not forgetting to chew scrambled eggs with greens and drink cocoa. Mary was sitting next to him, propping her chin on her fist, looking at them with quiet amusement. But then she realized, "It's good to be with you, but I have to cook dinner for someone." And she went to the stove. "Does your daughter cure horses?" Meanwhile, Adam was asking, "She does, doesn't she?" Answered Alvin. "Last year the circus came, and their horse was sick. It was capricious, didn't eat anything. Then it went completely sick, but you have to do the program." "Yes. What kind of circus is a circus if the horses don't perform? They're a team, you know. They can't perform without each other. Did they bring her to your daughter?" The boy's eyes went wide. "No, Adam." Alvin shook his head. The poor horse had no time to travel. She wasn't feeling well at all. Helen came and sat by her, talked to her. I don't know what the horse told, but only my daughter realized that the horse's stomach was not working. And the horse, you know how big it is. Laxatives, at least a bucket of them, I think. I didn't ask you exactly, but the horse came back to life in an instant. Just like that? The boy laughed. "Yes, just when it was all right," answered Alvin. "But the horse could have been lost, because guess what it ate that wasn't supposed to?" "I don't know," Adam thought. "Carrots, potatoes?" Well, she could have eaten carrots and potatoes, especially if she had eaten green potatoes that had been in the sun for a long time. But it was worse. The workers did not see to it and left a bucket near this young mare, in which they washed carrots with a washcloth. Together with carrots, she managed to swallow a piece of loofah. This loofah was the cause of the horse's illness. "You," disappointed stretched Adam. "How come?" That's it. The old man spread his hands. That's how it happens when someone is not working hard enough, not in good faith. "And why can not green potatoes to the horse?" asked Adam. "You see, in the sun and the potatoes, the strongest poison is formed. It's called solanine," explained Alvin. "Such poisonous potatoes should not be eaten by anyone, neither humans nor animals. It is very easy to get poisoned." "Mary, Mary!" Suddenly Adam shouted. "Where are our potatoes? Not in the sun." Frightened Mary, in her haste, did not understand what Adam was asking and answered off topic. "I'll cook the potatoes too, Adam. Do you want them fried or boiled?" "No, I don't need potatoes. I'm just asking if they're in the sun." "No, Adam." Mary was surprised at the question. "We keep them in the cellar." She looked questioningly at Alvin, but there was no time for conversation, and again the men were left alone. Alvin stacked the dishes neatly in the sink of the sink. "Well done, Adam. You've eaten everything. Even my Thunder wouldn't have anything to lick." "Who's that, Thunder?" Adam asked. "That's my dog. He's my only companion in the house," Alvin replied. "Don't you live with your daughter?" surprised the boy. "No, my daughter works in the city. There is her veterinary clinic. Her patients are waiting for her there, and me and Thunder live here in the village in a cottage." "What kind of dog do you have? Does it live in the house or in the yard?" Adam was curious about everything. "Well, it is uncomfortable for a big dog to live in a house. Thunder, I have freedom, loves freedom. He has a huge yard at his disposal, and at night I let him off the chain and he roams all over the garden. He's a good boy. Helen brought him to me for a reason." "Did your daughter give you a dog?" Adam was surprised again. "Well, whether it was a gift, I do not know. The thing is that my daughter has been picking up all the animals and birds since she was a little girl and putting them back to their owners, and this dog was put to sleep by unkind people when they went abroad, you know. They will live there beautifully, and they didn't need the old dog, so Helen took pity on him and asked me to take him in for a while. And he and I, two old men, became such good friends that now I can't even imagine my life without him." "How great!" Adam marveled. "And I want a dog so much, but my mom says she can't handle it. Mom has no time. Mary also has no time. They said that the dog should play with it, walk it, and he pointed sadly at his feet. Suddenly the boy raised his head. A light shone in his eyes. "Alvin, will you introduce me to Thunder?" "Of course, if Mommy lets me." In the evening Clara arrived. She was very eager to know how her son's acquaintance with his grandfather had gone. And all day long she was impatiently looking at her watch. She had a lot of things to do and wanted to go home. She barely waited for Alvin to pull up in front of the house and got out of the car. Alvin, whom the driver had to take home, was already ready to leave. Adam was sitting next to him in his stroller, his face lighting up at the sight of his mom. Mommy, can I go to Alvin's tomorrow?" Clara asked to herself. Wow, the son is already going to visit. So the acquaintance had taken place. The woman was overjoyed that the men had become friends. She greeted Alvin warmly and asked how the day was. "Fine, Mom," said Adam quickly. "I found out about Thunder. I want to see Alvin's dog. May I, Mom?" The mother didn't recognize her usually reserved and bored son. Her face flushed, her eyes burning, and the expression of joy on her pale face pleased her most. She laughed. All right, as long as it's not too much trouble for Alvin." "Adam, have you been so impertinent as to ask for a visit?" "Oh, come on, Clara." Alvin was embarrassed. "I'll be only glad, and Adam will be really good at my place. He and Thunder will make friends, I'm sure." They agreed that in the morning Adam would go to classes as usual, and at 2 o'clock Alvin would bring him to Alvin's house. After saying goodbye to everyone and glancing at the kitchen window, where Mary's silhouette could be seen, Alvin got into the car and Alvin drove out of the yard. Thunder greeted him with a joyful bark, missing him. "Well, Thunder, now we'll work together." Alvin spoke, putting a bowl of food in front of him. "I'll be the grandfather, and you will be Adam's pets. He is a good, kind boy, and smart to what I am at his age." Alvin laughed softly and waved his hand. The old man was so full of impressions that he didn't even eat dinner. Mary had a good meal today. He sighed. A woman's cooking, yes. After a quick drink of tea with whatever was at hand, he drifted off to sleep, but before his eyes were the boy's shining eyes, the mirrored walls of the fancy house, and the full hands of beautiful Mary. He smiled at this vision and sighed. Life seemed to be getting better. Alvin, as always in anticipation of any guest, began to clean up first thing in the morning, first around the cabin, then inside. He swept the already clean paths, tidied up Thunder's kennel, rinsed his food and water bowls. He did not like this time of waiting, when there seemed to be nothing to do, but his heart was still pounding, where he had overlooked, where he had left a mess. To distract himself, he began to go through fishing gear. The time would pass faster and the heart would calm down, because for an elderly man, any event brings a lot of excitement. Alvin delivered Adam on time. It had only been half an hour since his class had ended. He easily pulled out the stroller and put the boy in it. Adam, looking around and worrying, rolled down the path towards the cabin, but immediately stopped. "Thunder," he breathed out. The dog looked directly at the boy with her intelligent eyes, alert with her beautiful ears. She licked her lips and Adam laughed. "Well, Thunder, meet him," said Alvin to the dog. "This is our Adam. This is your own. You will serve him as you do me. Do you hear?" He rolled Adam's baby carriage closer to the dog. "Well, here he is. Thunder, Adam, socialize." The boy looked up at him. "Can I pet him?" "Of course you can," Alvin replied. The boy slowly reached out his skinny hand and with a careful movement, placed it on the dog's big head. "Thunder," he breathed out. The dog licked his hand and laid his head near the boy's feet. Adam leaned down and continued to stroke Thunder's thick fur. It seemed to him that he could sit like that all day, but Alvin was already calling his guests for tea. Mary had sent some apple pie with Alvin, by the way, so the tea party was a success. It was held in the same place where Clara had sat the other day with her host at a table in the garden. Thunder watched them from his seat, squinting his intelligent eyes and wagging his tail. In the fresh air, Adam's appetite was great, even took a deep breath after lunch. "Ooh, he's full. Shouldn't we guys go to my daughter's veterinary clinic?" Alvin suddenly suggested it. "Alvin, you're with Adam tonight, right?" "Yes, that's what Clara ordered," answered the mighty Alvin in a bass voice. "Let's go, the weather is great. The day is wasted. Come on, come on." And he began to put Adam in the car with jokes he only managed to shout. "Bye, Thunder, I'll come to you." The veterinary clinic struck Adam so much that he kept silent for a long time, only listening attentively to Helen's story. The girl was not expecting guests, but was pleased with her father and his friends. "This is how we work," she said, showing Adam treatment rooms, devices and couches for four-legged patients, and special devices to hold patients in the right position. It would be nice, of course, to update a lot of things, to make repairs, but the boy saw a lot of animals that were receiving medical care. Helen also showed the shelter where the animals are waiting for their owners, who have to leave them here for a while. Adam was particularly impressed with Adam, a ward for abandoned animals and birds that had been abandoned by their previous owners. There were also those who had been found, brought in by kind-hearted passers-by. Veterinarians helped them, but they could not arrange permanent residence for these pets, and the poor creatures had to huddle in a small adapted room where it was dark and quite cramped. Unfortunately, we don't even have any money for them. With a heavy sigh, Helen said, "We feed them what we can. It's a pity for them." The boy was so amazed by what he saw that he drove home in silence. When he was brought home, he waited impatiently for his mother. Finally, she entered with a smile to her son. "Well, what news do we have today?" "You know, Mom, I've been waiting for you so much," declared the son. "I wanted to ask your permission. Can I give my money to feed the animals?" "Wait, what animals?" The woman was surprised. "There, at the veterinary clinics at Helen's, the animals there have nothing to eat, you know? They don't get any money for food. Helen said so." The boy told his mother for a long time about his impressions, about the house, about the abandoned animals. She looked at her son and her heart was warm. She did not expect that the little heart of her child was so kind. "Do you want to help them?" she finally asked when Adam had finished his story. "Yes, I broke my piggy bank. There is a lot of money in there." "What do I need it for?" "I've got everything, Mom, don't I?" "You do." His mother answered him affectionately and stroked his head. "You have a good heart, son. I'm proud of you." "So it's okay." The child's eyes shone. "Well, of course you can, because it's your money. You can spend it as you wish, and it's a good thing." Clara was shocked by such an independent decision of her son. The woman saw in what an elevated mood the boy was. "And this is for 2 days of getting to know Alvin," she thought. "No, I did everything right. A man with invaluable worldly experience. A decent man. It shouldn't have happened. I hadn't made a mistake in choosing my grandfather." Meanwhile, Alvin, too, was under a strong impression of the last days of his life. His regime had changed. His surroundings had grown wider. There were new good people around him, and most of all he was happy to communicate with them. It was easy for him to be with Adam. He felt like he was in a distant childhood when everything was easy and simple. They talk, play, socialize with each other, and they don't need anyone else. How could anyone get paid for something like that? The next day, after a day of work, Alvin headed resolutely towards his employer as soon as she got out of the car. "Clara, I somehow got confused and didn't ask what exactly are my duties." He addressed her. "We've only talk and have fun with Adam." "I can't get paid for that, can I?" "No, Alvin, you don't have any special duties. Don't come to us like a job, but like your loved ones, if possible. Talk to Adam like you would talk to your grandson. He's been like family to me from the first minute, Clara. The old man's in a hurry. He's easy for me, but that's the most important thing." The woman interrupted him. "Adam's male influence comes in handy. He's so decisive with his savings. He's a real man." And she laughed happily, and Alvin sighed in relief. It had been 3 months since Alvin had been a grandfather. Every day he became more and more attached to the boy, and Adam responded to the old man in the same way. Mary, the housekeeper, only smiled at the two of them, a lonely woman who had also long lived with the interests of her adopted family. She loved Adam as much as if he were her grandson. She had been unlucky in life. Her husband was a drunk and abusive man. Mary's child died in infancy. Eventually, Mary ran away from her husband and took up residence in someone else's home, which became her own. And now she gave all her unspent maternal warmth to the mistress of the house, Clara. Recognizing in her young self, lonely, strong, but also wanting warmth and love, when Alvin appeared in the house, she instantly recognized him as a decent man. He was modest, neatly dressed, but felt the absence of a woman's hand. Going into the kitchen, always notices small things that need a man's strength. Lifts, fetches, and screws what is needed. Mary has more than once caught herself that with pleasure looks at the thin face of a man and thinks, "If only I had once had such a husband." Then she remonstrated and scolded herself. "What are you thinking about, young ladies in waiting?" But her heart could not command, and again she tried to treat the man something especially tasty. All the more that her favorite Adam, next to Alvin, seemed to acquire a wolfish appetite, and that pleased her madly. She began to prepare larger portions so that she could wrap the rest and give it to Alvin to take with her. "It's a pity, Alvin. Take some food. Don't hesitate to have dinner in the evening. It's too much trouble to cook." He was embarrassed, even blushed a little, but he dared not refuse the treat and was especially courteous to her the next day, when he came with his pupil for the afternoon meal. Now Alvin accompanied Adam everywhere, and to the pool, where the boy had individual lessons, and to classes in the rehabilitation center, and for walks. They never bored each other and always found topics to discuss. Sometimes, when Alvin had the weekend off, Adam would call him and ask him to come over. Alvin thought that without an agreement with the landlady, he should not take too much initiative and was sly. "Adam, you're a man. You should realize that Thunder misses me," he said back, "and some household chores are piling up." "Why?" pulled Adam. "If I could come to you, I would help you and play with Thunder. He wouldn't be bored." And on his last day off, the boy asked him directly, "Alvin, can I come visit you?" "Sure, come if your mom lets you." Alvin breathed out a sigh of relief, and his mother did allow it. Moreover, she brought Adam herself, and she brought Mary with her. Alvin only grunted in embarrassment. Adam and his mother took a ride along the path. Then Clara decided to walk to the woods, and Mary began to clean the house. And as he did not persist, she, smiling, washed, rubbed and scrubbed and said, "It's been a long time since a woman's hands have been here. So Alvin, you let me clean up, and you entertain the guests." The bright winter sun was already beginning to warm up, so the adults were not afraid that Adam would catch cold. Thunder played with the boy with pleasure, forgetting about his old ailments. Adam's options were limited too, so the two were quite content in each other's company. As always, after fresh air, the boy ate boiled potatoes with appetite, dipping them in melted butter. Dinner was prepared this time by Alvin himself. He allowed himself to brag. "Well, the potatoes from our garden are good, crispy, aren't they? And my neighbor's butter, pure cow's butter, I save every year since autumn. Eat it. It's a natural product, not some synthetic one." Clara even squinted. It tasted so good. The day off had gone wonderfully. She said as she finished her dinner, "Thank you for your hospitality, Alvin. It's time for us to go, and Mary has finished cleaning up," said Clara. "Mom, it's so nice here. Can I stay at Alvin's for the night? I'll be gone and Thunder will miss you." The boy's eyes shone and his cheeks blushed. The mother saw how happy the child was in the company of the old man and Thunder. "Clara, let Adam stay. Tomorrow is Sunday. Alvin can come and get him. If you don't trust the old man, let Mary stay. There is enough room for everyone." Alvin supported the boy. Adam looked at his mother in such a belittling way that she hesitated. Here Mary also put in her weighty word. "If necessary, I'll stay here. Let the boy play in the fresh air, and all in the city, and in the city. And tomorrow night you'll send a car for us. What am I going to do with you?" "Stay, you insolent guests," laughed Clara. From that day on, Adam's overnight stays at his grandfather's house became quite frequent. Adam spent almost every weekend with Alvin. Sometimes Mary stayed overnight to prepare a good meal for the two men, but this happened very rarely because her main work required her presence in the big farmhouse. The old man and the boy were so strong that the two of them never got bored, and thunder did not let them get bored. Spring came, and one weekend, watching Alvin dismantle fishing gear, Adam became interested in unfamiliar objects. "What's this? What's this? And how does the feeder catch?" he asked Alvin. He patiently, even with pleasure, showed everything and told about the tricks of fishing. "Wow," the boy's eyes lit up, "and I have never been fishing." Alvin realized it was time. If in time to support interest, it will be Adam's gift for life, and if you lose this moment, so it will fly away, and the boy will not become a fisherman, never in his life. "Well, tomorrow then, without any solemnity," he said. "Let's go to bed, and tomorrow at 5 a.m. we'll meet the dawn at the river." Adam gasped. "Really? We'll get up and go. That'll be the truth. We're our own masters, aren't we?" Trying not to show his excitement, Alvin answered him. Yes, he was worried. The boy was not used to hardship, the damp morning, the chill, and the damp air. There was no telling if he would enjoy it all, but it was said done. Up at the right time, quickly packed and set off. Mary grumbling and putting on Adam a warm old Alvin jacket, kept shoving them a bag of food, then crossed discreetly to the boy his stroller. It was Adam's first fishing trip. You can't go far in a stroller, and it was decided to fish in the pond, about 500 meters from the road. The old man spoke in detail about how to fish properly, how to string worms, how to cast the rod. At morning dawn, beat good, Alvin began to drag one fish after another. Adam awkwardly slung the rod, long, uncomfortable, but here he was lucky, a bite. He froze, looking at the float, then looked at Alvin. He said silently, "Pull." The boy pulled the rod. A small, silvery fish flashed in the air. "Yay!" Alvin shouted in a whisper, and Adam immediately picked up the joke. Hooray! The joy of catching their first fish was greater than the new cell phone they'd bought for Christmas. The fishermen got into the excitement and didn't notice how time flew by. Soon there was a nice catch in the bucket. Alvin was pleasantly surprised that Adam did not show any weakness of spirit. He patiently chased away the mosquitoes that were so pesky as the air warmed. He didn't whine when the fishing hook got caught in his hair, and in general, he was a tough little man. That afternoon, Mary boiled the royal fish soup in her own special recipe, and the rest of the fish were roasted on the brazier, and the men went together to build the fire and clean the fish. Despite being tired and unaccustomed to hard work for him, Adam did not think of giving up. He also cooked fish on the fire for the first time in his life and was proud that he was really helping adults. He enjoyed looking at his hard-earned calluses and scratched, hooked fingers. He might not become a fishing enthusiast, but this joy would stay with him for the rest of his life. Alvin thought, and Mary, looking at the way her favorite flies to the soup, rejoiced, strengthened health and ruddy cheeks Adam. Summer days passed one after another. Adam got tanned and strong. Mary laughed. Before this summer, she had been racking her brains, inventing a particularly tasty dish for the boy, but here he ate everything and asked for more. A healthy body is a healthy spirit. The driver, Alvin, exclaimed, feeling how the boy was getting stronger. He had to lift both the child and the wheelchair to load them into the car, and he could tell exactly how much his ward weighed before his walks with his grandfather and how much he weighed now. Fall was approaching again. One Saturday evening, Mary and Adam also drove over to Alvin's house to take a break from the noise of the city and enjoy the last of the warm money together. Mary and Alvin, for a long time, have not hidden mutual sympathy, and the woman did not hesitate to come to patronize in his bachelor household to prepare dishes tastier. It was a quiet, peaceful evening. Nothing boded ill, but age sometimes gives out unexpected and unpleasant things. In the evening, Alvin suddenly felt sick, shortness of breath and dizziness. In order not to cause panic in Mary, already prone to excessive worry, he quietly called Adam. "Adam, I don't feel well. My blood pressure must be up. We won't make any noise, or we'll scare Mary. I'm going to take my medicine and lie down while you feed Thunder. I'll just lie down for a while, and then we'll go to dinner with you." Adam nodded understandingly and rolled the baby carriage to the dog kennel. He fed Thunder, scratched him behind the ear, and talked to his four-legged friend. It was time to go after Alvin. When the boy pulled into the old man's room, he saw Alvin lying on the bed, the man's eyes closed, one arm dangling to the floor. Adam was frightened. It seemed to him that the old man was not breathing. "Grandpa Alvin, don't die," shouted the boy. Without remembering himself, he jumped up sharply from the chair and took a few steps towards Alvin. But from the strain near the very bed, he fell to his knees. Alvin jumped up on the spot in horror. "Jesus, Adam! What happened?" He shrieked, scooping the boy up under his arms, lifting him off the floor. Adam, both crying and laughing. "I was frightened. I thought you were dead." "Well, Adam, don't cry. It's all right. Nothing's going to happen to me. It must have been the medicine, and I dozed off. And you? Did you come to me by yourself?" "I don't know. I guess I don't remember. I was really scared." Alvin sat on the floor, cradling the child, and could not understand anything. Was Adam so shaken by the fright that he was able to take independent steps? The man believed and disbelieved, but for now he was afraid to test his hunch. Adam sobbed one last time and looked up at him. "Grandpa Alvin, don't tell Mom I cried," he said embarrassedly. "Oh, come on, honey. Of course I won't. Did you cry?" "I didn't see any tears." Alvin pressed the child's blonde head to his breast and kissed the top of his head discreetly. He was touched to the core by the boy's anxiety. Meanwhile, a frightened Mary appeared in the doorway, having come running to Adam's shrieks from the far corner of the garden. "What on earth is going on here?" she exclaimed, poking her head through the doorway. "Is everyone alive? What's going to happen to us? We are strong men, almost heroes," answered Alvin with a smile. He pulled Adam away from him and offered, "Come on, let me lift you up, and we'll try to take a few steps. Don't be afraid, Adam. I'll hold you up." The old man lifted the boy off the floor and held him up until the boy had his legs spread firmly. Mary froze in tense anticipation, but remained patiently silent. "Well," quietly ordered Alvin, and Adam took the first step. Even though his grandfather held him with both hands, even if it was only one step, but he took it himself. Adam was covered with sweat, his face was flushed, his eyes were fixed on his feet, as if he was mesmerized by their movements. Alvin gently nudged him forward, and the boy took another step, then another, and now the old man slowly led him around the round table across the small room. After taking a few steps, Adam looked up at his grandfather with some crooked, tortured smile, as if not believing himself. Then hesitantly, with Alvin's encouragement, he took a couple steps toward the exit. "Jesus, Adam." Mary, who was standing in the doorway, embraced him with her arms and pressed him to her warm chest with all her heart. The woman cried and kissed the boy with wet lips, then took his head away from her, was immediately frightened that he was standing almost on the same level as her, on his own feet and began to cry with joy again. Everyone was stunned in a ghastly excitement, dropping something now and then, murmuring their worries. Mary set the table, and the men, silently digesting the excitement of the minutes past, smiled at their thoughts. Finally, the hot tea helped everyone to calm down and relax, and the three of them began to remember anew what had happened, trying to make everything look funny or amusing. Needless to say, the feelings of the three loved ones when they went to bed quite late in the small house among the greenery of the garden. The boy, as might be expected, was tired after an unaccustomed walk. Even though it was only a dozen other steps, but for him it was equal to a space flight. Therefore, the hero fell asleep with a happy smile on his face. Alvin, as always, was worried about the future of Adam. Would the child be able to overcome his fear? Would he go with confidence and determination? Would this urge to walk turn out to be a remission? He tossed and turned for a long time, remembering his fear, then smiled when he saw Adam's frightened face again. At old age, you don't give a restful sleep. Well, and Mary, according to the eternal female habit, prayed fervently for her beloved Adam, asked the Lord for mercy, and secretly admired Alvin. If it weren't for him, none of this would have happened to Adam. It is he, Alvin, who helps the boy to find strength. And then she shamefully hid her face from herself in the pillow after Alvin suddenly snapped. In the morning everyone remembered yesterday's joy. Adam could not wait to start walking as soon as possible. Since the evening, the adults had warned him not to start walking on his own in the morning. Your leg muscles are still very weak. It's dangerous. You have to take it easy for the first few days, Alvin explained. Be sure to wait for me, just the two of us. Adam promised. He barely waited for breakfast to be over, even ate against his custom. Not as well as usual. Well, hurry up. Now. Alvin smiled at him. Thunder watched in amazement as his two masters, big and small, intertwined into one four-legged creature, passed by his kennel time after time. Adam had a hard time walking on the ground. The path seemed to curl up under his feet, as if on purpose, preventing him from walking. The boy was sweating and out of breath, but again and again Alvin spoke. Let's go. He practiced so persistently that after lunch he didn't even object when Mary laid him down in the shade on a wide bench. Happy, he fell asleep in the fresh air, only his cheeks flushed with a healthy blush, and the old men sat together, admiring the sleeping child and talking quietly about their own things. What happiness God had given them, how great it was to be not lonely in their old age, how good it was in the garden today. They didn't talk about everything, of course, but they kept silent about something secret. It was Sunday evening, and they waited anxiously for the arrival of Clara at the dacha. Finally, her black Jeep stopped near the gate of the cottage. When she opened the gate, the woman saw that the wheelchair was empty and standing orphaned, and Adam was walking carefully along the path leading to the house. He was being carefully supported by Alvin, and next to him was a huge Thunder, forgetting about his advanced years. Clara stood silent and cried, afraid to break their idyll. She even managed to hold back a cry of joy and waited until her son came to her. Then they had tea again, talked about yesterday's events, discussed every little thing that came to mind. Excited Adam dreamed how he would go fishing, then to the forest for mushrooms then. There was no end to his dreams. Wait, Adam. Alvin slowed him down. Remember what Helen said about the weakened wings of birds that don't fly for a long time in the hospital? So did you. Your legs have been immobile for too long, and now the main thing is not to hurt them. You and your mom will show yourselves to the doctors, They will tell you how to restore their strength, and then you and I will go anywhere." Finally, they began to get ready to go home. When the boy got into the car, Alvin said to Clara, "I guess you don't need me anymore." Adam, of course, must be urgently shown to the doctors, although I can tell you without doctors that everything will be fine. The old man became sad. He would not go to his pupil every morning now. Tears were ready to come to his eyes. Clara hugged him heartily. "Don't be silly, Alvin. How will we be without you? I have no words to express my gratitude to you. You not only became my son's grandfather, but you replaced the father I don't remember. You will always be a part of our family. Yes, you are like family to me too," the old man said, quietly wiping his eyes. He waved after the car for a long time and knew that tomorrow the young woman would call him and invite him to her place. Mary, holding Alvin by the arm, slowly walked along the leaf-strewn path to the house. Today they again visited the cemetery where Kathy, Alvin's wife, repented on the day of her death. Mary carefully tidied up the grave of a woman she had never known, but from her daughter Helen she judged that Kathy was a kind and sincere woman. Otherwise, how could Helen grow up to be so kind-hearted and hardworking? "It's just a pity that things didn't work out for my daughter with her family and children," Alvin always regretted, "and she was left alone with her beloved animals. You, Alvin, do not anger God." Mary consoled him. "What can you do? Not everyone is given such happiness as having children. So you see, I've lived my life like a barren flower. Yes, you are Mary, and now you are still quite blooming." The old man smiled and grabbed to hug his girlfriend. "Wow, barren flower, what would I do without you?" They became friends immediately, from the first days of their acquaintance, and then lived together to brighten up two lonely lives. At first, Mary stayed for the weekend. Then, as she grew older, she was replaced in the big house by Clara, a young assistant, and she finally moved to Alvin's house. The two of them were calm and joyful. They walked leisurely around the garden, trying to please the children with apples and ripe plums. The number of children, along with Helen, had long included Clara and Adam, who had grown into a tall, handsome man. All these years, Alvin's life went not just next to, but in close connection with his new family, Clara, Adam, and Mary. Clara more than once or twice invited him to move into her house. She even offered to build a small outbuilding in the same yard so that he wouldn't have to travel back and forth, but the old man held independent views in everything. Moreover, now he was not alone. Luckily for him, he met Mary, who doted on two men, Adam and her Alvin, as she always called him. Helen was incredibly glad that her father was not alone. She quickly became friends with Aunt Mary, as she began to call his new, although not young, wife. The old people didn't sign. Why such tenderness? It is not their business to attract unnecessary human attention to themselves. It is enough for them to live nearby quietly, so that there is a companion on a cloudy day, a sunny morning, or a sleepless night. With the groans of an old man, there is no escape. Helen came to see them quite rarely now because she was addicted to tourist trips around the country. The old people's house was filled with magnets, souvenirs, all kinds of embroidery and rugs from different parts of the world. Adam has grown up over the years, graduated from school and college. No one would have imagined that the handsome young man, who was once disabled and spent several years of his childhood confined to a wheelchair. At the beginning of his career, he completed an internship at Clara. Mom wanted her son to have his first experience under her supervision. However, after receiving his diploma, the son decided not to work with her. "No, Mom, no," he stated firmly. "I don't want to be a mama's boy. That's the first thing. You will understand me here, right? Mother could not resist his disarming smile. Well, suppose I understand, but I wouldn't control you so much. She objected weakly, clearly realizing that in fact, she could not help but interfere with her son's work. And what Mother could? And the second reason is, I'm not interested in your industry, Mom. You know, I have always dreamed of internet technologies. What should I do now? Forget about your dream? Clara, of course, agreed. She remembered herself very well in her youth. She never knew how to obey someone else's will. She did everything in defiance of everything. If only he could achieve his goal. Maybe this is the secret of her success. Well, she won't cross her boy's path. Let him build his life the way he likes. He is an adult, independent man. Adam really wanted to achieve everything himself, as Alvin once taught him. Not believing in God or the devil, Clara only gasped and mentally spat to the side so as not to jinx it when faced with his stubbornness, bordering on stubbornness. Her weak boy, who once suffered from 2 strong experiences, imperceptibly grew stronger physically and spiritually, and all thanks to the fact that he received life lessons in time from an old, unremarkable, in general, man, grandfather Alvin. Clara thanked fate for receiving some kind of magical hint that summer. Her son needs a friend, a mature man, an experienced and decent person. So people who were completely strangers to each other became close and became, in fact, one family. Adam, having left his hometown, did not abandon his grandfather Alvin. He made sure to deliver him a good computer. And now Alvin was a user, better than some of the young people, and he and his mother also organized a good renovation in the country house where 2 of their relatives now lived. And the life of Mary and Alvin became completely comfortable. Clara also met her fate at an exhibition of young artists and got married. Hello! It came from behind the gate. Do you accept guests? Oh, Clara! Alvin was happy. Mary, put on the kettle. Clara and Ethan arrived. We came to you for a reason, said joyful Clara. We brought you invitations, so Adam's wedding is coming soon. And she handed Alvin an envelope decorated with 2 doves. Behind her, the silent bumpkin Ethan smiled, who, smiling so silently, made friends with the inhabitants of the country house and the young shepherd Rada, who was sheltered after the death of Thunder. It turned out that Adam met a good girl and proposed to her, and now joyful chores lay ahead, preparing gifts, dressing for the wedding. Well, Clara said, finishing off the delicious tea from Alvin with his signature dried herbs. Tomorrow we will pick you up at this time. You need to buy beautiful outfits. What about us old people? Both protested. Clara stopped them with one wave of her hand. Come on. Our Adam must have the most beautiful relatives. Do you agree? It's a shame. What will the bride's relatives think? The old people sighed. Yes, it was not worth disgracing the boy. Alvin and Mary were among the most honored guests. Meet these 2 people who are dearest to me. Adam introduced them to his bride and matchmakers. My grandfather Alvin, I owe my character, strength and health to him. And this is Mary, my nurse and water maid, well, almost a nanny. And now she's also a grandmother, since she's my grandfather's wife. I'll tell you a lot of good things about them. Alvin and Mary were embarrassed, furtively looking at the beautiful bride and their pet Adam, but soon got used to it and completely devoted themselves to the holiday. The guests had fun, said toasts, as usual, wishing the newlyweds eternal love, family happiness, and many children. Mary, as usual, cried with joy in such cases, and Alvin only grunted with displeasure, wiping an unsolicited tear from his eyes.